Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I've been working as a park ranger in the Arkansas Ozarks for 11 years, and I can tell you that these mountains hold secrets most people will never know. Dense forests, limestone caves, hidden crevices where sunlight barely reaches even at noon. This place has found a way to keep some things buried, sometimes literally. My name is Jakin Renner, and the event I'm about to describe took place in the fall of 2019. It all started with something simple, something that should have been insignificant. Near Hemmed-In Hollow Falls, close to the highest waterfall between the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains, a wet map was found. It was just a piece of paper, but that map dragged me and my partner onto a path that still wakes us from our sleep at night. The Ozarks aren't like other mountain ranges. They're old, worn down by time, into something that feels ancient and patient. The vegetation is thick, oak, hickory, and pine trees so densely packed that you can be 10 feet from the trail and completely invisible. The undergrowth is a tangle of Virginia creeper, poison ivy, and thorny greenbrier that'll shred your pants if you're not careful. And the caves, God, the caves are everywhere. Limestone karst formations riddled with sinkholes and underground passages that go on for miles. It was early October when I found the map. The leaves were just starting to turn, splashes of red and gold against the deep green of the pines. I was doing a routine patrol along the Hemmed-In Hollow Trail, checking for illegal campsites and making sure the trail markers were still intact after the summer season. The trail is a popular one, about 5 miles round trip with some serious elevation gain. It winds through the forest, crosses a creek a few times, and eventually opens up to the base of the falls where water drops 209 feet into a natural amphitheater of moss-covered rock. I'd just crossed the second creek crossing, my boots squelching in the mud, when I saw it. There, on top of a flat boulder next to the water, was a topographic map. It was soaked through, the paper swollen with moisture, but it hadn't fallen apart. That struck me as odd right away. Most paper left out in the elements for even a few hours would be disintegrating, especially this close to the water. But this map looked like it had been carefully placed there, almost like someone wanted it to be found. I picked it up carefully, holding it by the edges. It was a standard USGS topo map of the Buffalo National River area, the kind you can buy at any outdoor store or ranger station. The detail was good: contour lines, elevation markers, trails, and waterways all clearly marked. But as I unfolded it fully, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was only one mark on the entire map, a single X drawn in what looked like black permanent marker. No route leading to it, no notes, no other markings at all. Just that X sitting in the middle of a section of forest about 3 miles northwest of where I was standing. The area it marked wasn't near any established trail. In fact, it was in one of the more remote sections of the park, a place where the terrain gets rough and the forest gets thick enough that even experienced hikers tend to avoid it. I stood there for a moment, water rushing past my boots, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Lost hiker who'd marked their location, geocache coordinates, some kind of prank. None of it made much sense. If someone was lost and trying to mark their position, they'd include more information. If it was geocaching, there'd be other marks, maybe a route. And if it was a prank, why leave it here on this random boulder in the middle of nowhere? I folded the map carefully and tucked it into my pack. I'd bring it back to the station and see if anyone had reported anything unusual. Maybe someone had filed a missing person report. Or maybe one of the other rangers had seen something. But even as I continued my patrol, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that map was wrong. The rest of my patrol was uneventful. I made it to the falls, checked the area for trash and damage, and started the hike back out. The forest was quiet that day, quieter than usual. The birds weren't singing much, and I didn't see any of the usual wildlife. No deer, no wild turkeys, not even many squirrels. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and the distant rush of water. When I got back to the ranger station at Buffalo Point, my partner June Mallory was there finishing up some paperwork. June had been a ranger longer than I had, almost 15 years, and she knew these mountains better than anyone I'd ever met. She was in her mid-40s, lean and weathered from years of outdoor work, with sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, as I walked in, not looking up from her paperwork. I pulled the map out of my pack and spread it on the desk in front of her. Found this near the second creek crossing on Hemmed-In Hollow Trail. Someone left it on a boulder. June looked up then, her expression shifting from casual interest to something more focused. She studied the map for a long moment, her finger tracing the contour lines around the X. "That's Blackburn Hollow," she said quietly. "Or near it anyway. You know the area?" "Know of it," she said. "It's rough country. No trails, thick forest, lots of caves. We don't get many calls from that section because not many people go in there. Too hard to access." She looked up at me. "You thinking someone's in trouble?" "I don't know what to think," I admitted. The map was just sitting there, perfectly placed. No signs of a struggle, no torn edges, nothing. Just this one X and nothing else. June frowned, her fingers still resting on the marked location. Could be nothing. Could be someone marking a good camping spot or a cave they wanted to come back to. Could be, I said, but I didn't believe it. Neither did she, I could tell. "You want to check it out?" June asked, looking at me with those sharp eyes. I nodded. "Yeah, I think we should." "Tomorrow morning, then," she said, folding the map. "I'll clear it with the superintendent. We'll go in light, just a day hike to check things out. If there's nothing there, we come back and file it away." That night, back in my cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about the map. I spread it out on my kitchen table and studied it under the light, trying to see if there was anything I'd missed. The X was precise, not rushed or sloppy. Whoever had drawn it knew exactly where they were marking. I traced the terrain with my finger, noting the elevation changes, the creek systems, the limestone formations. Blackburn Hollow was a deep cut in the landscape, the kind of place where water had carved through rock over millions of years. Dense forest, steep slopes, and according to the map, several cave entrances scattered throughout the area. I thought about June's reaction when she saw the map. She'd recognized the area immediately, and there'd been something in her expression, not quite concern, but something close to it. Caution, maybe. Like she knew something about Blackburn Hollow that she hadn't said. I tried to sleep that night, but I kept waking up, my mind turning over possibilities. By the time my alarm went off at 5:30, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the morning sounds of the forest outside my window. June and I met at the station just after 6. The sun was barely up, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. We packed light: water, first aid kit, GPS unit, radio, and my service pistol. June brought a coil of rope and some climbing gear, just in case we ran into any cave systems that needed exploring. "You sleep okay?" June asked, as we loaded the gear into her truck. "Not really," I admitted. She nodded, like she understood. "Yeah, me neither." We drove north on Highway 65, then turned off onto a Forest Service road that wasn't much more than 2 ruts in the dirt. The road took us deep into the national forest, away from the developed areas and into the backcountry. After about 30 minutes of rough driving, June pulled off into a small clearing. "We walk from here," she said, killing the engine. The forest around us was thick and still. Morning mist clung to the hollows, giving everything a ghostly quality. I shouldered my pack and followed June as she started into the woods, using the GPS to navigate toward the X on the map. The terrain was immediately challenging. No trails meant we were pushing through undergrowth, climbing over fallen logs, and navigating around thick patches of greenbrier that would tear you apart if you tried to force your way through. June moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, finding the path of least resistance, reading the landscape. After about an hour of hiking, we descended into Blackburn Hollow. The change was immediate. The air grew cooler, damper. The canopy overhead was so thick that the morning light barely penetrated. The ground was covered in moss and wet leaves, everything slick and treacherous underfoot. I could hear water somewhere nearby, a creek flowing over rocks. "How much further?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. June checked the GPS. "Half a mile, maybe less. We're close." We continued in silence. The only sounds our breathing and the soft crunch of leaves under our boots. I found myself scanning the forest constantly, looking for what? I didn't know. Signs of someone being here recently, maybe. Or signs that someone had been here and left in a hurry. Then June stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. I froze, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just the ambient sounds of the forest. Then I caught it, a faint rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. But it stopped as soon as we did, like whatever was making the noise had heard us and gone still. We waited for a long moment, neither of us moving. The forest remained silent. Finally, June lowered her hand and we continued forward, but I noticed she'd unclipped the safety strap on her bear spray holster. 10 minutes later, we reached the location marked on the map. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it. Just another patch of forest, maybe slightly less dense than the surrounding area. But as I looked closer, I saw what had drawn our attention. The ground here had been disturbed. Not recently, the leaves and forest debris had settled back over it, but someone had definitely dug here. You could see it in the slight depression, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The kind of depression that happens when you dig a hole and then fill it back in. Over time, the dirt settles and compacts, leaving that telltale sunken shape. June saw it too. She walked around the perimeter slowly, her eyes scanning the ground. "Someone dug here," she said, confirming what I was thinking. "A couple months ago, maybe longer." "But no signs of them actually digging," I said, looking around. "No shovel marks on the surrounding trees, no disturbed soil thrown aside." "Yeah," June said quietly. "That's weird." I knelt down next to the depression, running my hand over the surface. The soil felt normal, not freshly turned. Whatever had been buried here had been buried a while ago. Or whatever had been dug up had been dug up a while ago. I couldn't tell which. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" June asked, though her tone suggested she hoped I wasn't. "That we need to dig this up and see what's down there?" She sighed. "Yeah, that's what I was thinking." We didn't have proper digging tools with us, but June had brought a small, folding shovel for emergencies. It would have to do. She started digging while I used a stick to help move the soil. The ground was soft, still damp from recent rains. As we dug, I kept expecting to hit something, a body, buried treasure, anything that would explain the map and the X. But we didn't find anything, just dirt and rocks and tree roots. We dug down about 3 feet before June hit something solid. Not rock, it had a different sound to it when her shovel struck. We both froze looking at each other. Then we carefully scraped away the remaining soil. It was wood, a piece of plywood, maybe 3 feet square, wedged horizontal in the ground. It had been there long enough that the edges were starting to rot, but the center was still solid. There were no markings on it, no handles, nothing that indicated what it was covering or why it was there. "Should we pull it up?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. June nodded. "We've come this far." We worked our fingers under the edges and lifted. The plywood came up with a wet, sucking sound, and underneath it was darkness. A hole, maybe 4 feet across, descending straight down into the earth. I clicked on my flashlight and pointed it into the opening. It was a cave entrance, or more accurately, a cave entrance that someone had deliberately covered up. The hole dropped about 15 feet before opening up into what looked like a larger chamber. I could see limestone walls, slick with moisture, and the glint of water at the bottom. "Well," June said, her voice tight, "this just keeps getting weirder." I played my light around the edges of the opening, looking for anything that might tell us more. That's when I saw them, scratches on the inside of the hole near the top. They looked like they'd been made by something metal, maybe a tool or a weapon. They were old, the rock around them starting to weather, but they were definitely there. Someone had carved them deliberately. "June," I said, pointing them out with my light. "Look at this." She leaned in close, her face inches from the opening. "Are those letters?" I looked closer. She was right. They weren't just random scratches, they were crudely carved letters. It was hard to make out in the poor light and with the weathering, but I could just barely read them. "Stay out." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Those weren't the words of someone marking a cool cave they'd found. Those were the words of someone warning others away, or someone who'd been down there and didn't want anyone else to make the same mistake. "We need to call this in," June said, her voice firm. "This is beyond a day hike now. If there's something down there—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We both knew what she meant. If there was something down there, a body, evidence of a crime, anything, we needed backup and proper equipment. June pulled out her radio, but when she keyed the mic, all we got was static. We were too deep in the hollow, too much rock and vegetation between us and the nearest repeater tower. Cell phones were useless out here for the same reason. "We need to get to higher ground," I said, looking around. The hollow walls rose steeply on both sides of us, covered in trees and underbrush. June nodded and replaced the plywood over the hole, carefully positioning it exactly as we'd found it. Then we marked the location with GPS coordinates and a small cairn of rocks that we could find again if needed. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the forest, but I never saw anything. Just trees and shadows and that oppressive silence that seemed to hang over Blackburn Hollow like a blanket. We climbed out of the hollow, struggling up the steep slope until we reached a ridge with a partial view of the sky. June tried the radio again, and this time we got through. She reported what we'd found to dispatch, giving them the GPS coordinates and a brief description. They told us to come back to the station and that they'd alert the sheriff's department and the superintendent. As we started the hike back to the truck, neither of us said much. I think we were both processing what we'd found. A deliberately concealed cave entrance with a warning carved into the stone. A map left where it would be found, marked with a single X leading right to it. None of it made sense, but all of it felt wrong. The hike back seemed to take longer than the hike in. The forest felt different now, more oppressive. The silence that had seemed peaceful that morning now felt heavy and watching. I found myself constantly checking behind us. that feeling of being observed growing stronger with each step. We were maybe halfway back to the truck when June stopped again, this time without warning. I nearly ran into her. "You hear that?" she whispered. I listened. At first, nothing. Then I heard it, footsteps. Someone walking through the forest maybe 50 yards behind us. The steps were slow, deliberate. Not trying to be quiet, but not trying to catch up to us either. Just following. "Hello?" I called out, my hand instinctively moving to my pistol. "Park ranger, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent. That unnatural silence where even the insects stopped making noise. We waited for a response, but none came. "This is the Park Service," June called out, her voice authoritative and strong. "We need you to show yourself." Still nothing. We waited for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 1, both of us scanning the forest behind us. Finally, June made a decision. "We keep moving," she said quietly. "Quick but steady. We don't run unless we have to, but we don't stop again until we reach the truck." I nodded, and we continued forward, moving faster now. I kept my head on a swivel, watching our back trail. After a few minutes, I heard the footsteps again. Still following, still maintaining that same distance. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to catch us. They were just making sure we left. The walk back to the truck was one of the longest of my life. That whole time, those footsteps stayed with us, never getting closer, never falling back. When we finally broke out of the tree line and saw June's truck sitting in the clearing, I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. We practically ran the last 100 yards. June had her keys out, and we threw our packs in the bed and jumped in the cab. She started the engine, and we pulled out of there fast, kicking up dirt and rocks. I watched through the back window as the tree line receded, but I never saw who had been following us. The forest just stood there, dense and still and keeping its secrets. We didn't talk much on the drive back. When we finally got cell service, June's phone started buzzing with missed calls and messages. The superintendent wanted us back at the station immediately. The sheriff's department was sending deputies. And apparently, after June's radio call, they'd pulled the records and found something. Something about Blackburn Hollow that we should have been told about before we went in there. Something that made June's hands tighten on the steering wheel and her jaw clench when she read the message. "What is it?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. She handed me her phone without taking her eyes off the road. I read the message from the superintendent. "Blackburn Hollow. Multiple missing person reports, 1992-1995. 3 hikers never found. Area was searched extensively then abandoned. Recommend extreme caution. Do not return alone." I felt my stomach drop. 3 missing hikers. The same hollow we'd just been walking through, the same area where someone had buried something, or someone, and then carefully concealed it. The same area where we'd been followed by someone who'd made sure we knew they were there but never showed themselves. "Jesus," I muttered, handing the phone back. "Yeah," June said grimly. "Jesus is right." The ranger station at Buffalo Point was buzzing when we got back. 2 sheriff's deputies were already there, along with our superintendent, a man named Robert Hendricks. Hendricks was in his 60s, a career Park Service employee who'd seen just about everything these mountains had to offer. But when June and I walked in, covered in dirt and sweat, I saw genuine concern in his face. "You 2 okay?" he asked, before anything else. "We're fine," June said, though I noticed her hand was still shaking slightly as she set her pack down. "But you need to hear everything." We spent the next hour going over every detail. The map on the boulder, the hike into Blackburn Hollow, the concealed cave entrance, the carved warning, and most importantly, the footsteps that had followed us out. The deputies took notes, asked questions, and exchanged looks that made it clear they were taking this seriously. One of the deputies, a younger guy named Martinez, pulled up a file on his laptop. "The missing persons from the 90s, he said, turning the screen so we could see. First was Sarah Brooks in 92. 23 years old, experienced hiker. Her car was found at a trailhead near Blackburn Hollow. No sign of her after that." I felt a chill run down my spine. Brooks. The name we were told not to use in our story. But this was real. Second was David Foster in 1993, Martinez continued. 31, local guy who knew these woods. His family reported him missing after he didn't come home from a solo camping trip. His tent and gear were found near the same area, but he was gone. Foster, the other forbidden name. This was getting worse. Third was Emily Patterson in 1995, 19 years old, college student. She was hiking with a group, got separated near Blackburn Hollow, never seen again. Martinez closed the laptop. After Patterson went missing, the Park Service and Sheriff's Department did a massive search, spent 3 weeks combing through every inch of that hollow, found absolutely nothing. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, nothing. It was like all 3 of them just vanished into thin air. "And the searches didn't find the cave entrance we found?" I asked. Hendricks shook his head. "Apparently not, though, to be fair, that hollow is huge, and the vegetation was probably even thicker back then. If someone had deliberately concealed that entrance, it's possible the search teams walked right past it." "But why conceal it?" June asked the question we'd all been thinking. "Why go to the trouble of digging it up, or down, or whatever, and then covering it with plywood and burying it?" Nobody had an answer for that. The second deputy, an older woman named Rogers, spoke up. "Could be a lot of reasons. Maybe someone was using the cave for something illegal. Meth lab, marijuana grow operation, stolen goods. They hide the entrance to keep people out." "That doesn't explain the map," I said. "If you're trying to hide something illegal, you don't leave a map that leads right to it." "Unless," June said slowly, "unless whoever left that map wasn't the same person who concealed the cave." That hung in the air for a moment. The implications were troubling. If June was right, it meant we had at least 2 parties involved. Someone who'd concealed the cave, possibly years ago, and someone else who knew about it and wanted it found, or at least wanted to point someone toward it. "We need to go back," Rogers said, standing up. "We need proper equipment and we need to see what's in that cave." Hendricks nodded. "Agreed. But not today. It's already past noon and I don't want anyone going into that hollow with less than a full day's light. We'll organize a proper team. Park Service, Sheriff's Department, maybe even bring in a cave rescue unit if needed. We go in tomorrow morning, early, and we do it right." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about those missing hikers. Sarah Brooks, who'd gone into the woods and never come out. David Foster, whose family still didn't know what happened to him. Emily Patterson, barely more than a kid, lost in those dark hollers and never found. Were they in that cave? Had they found the entrance, gone inside and never made it back out? Or had something else happened to them? Something that had nothing to do with the cave we'd found. And then there was that other possibility, the one I didn't want to think about but couldn't ignore. What if they hadn't gone into the cave voluntarily? What if someone had taken them there? I thought about the footsteps that had followed June and me out of the hollow. Slow, deliberate, making sure we knew they were there. Was that the same person who'd concealed the cave? Were they warning us off, the same way that carved message warned people to stay out? Or were they making sure we left, making sure we didn't dig any deeper than we already had. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. I pulled out my own map of the area and spread it on the table, studying the terrain around Blackburn Hollow. The geography was complex, a maze of ridges and valleys, caves and sinkholes, with very few access points. If you wanted to hide something in there, it would stay hidden. And if you wanted to make sure someone never left, well, there were plenty of ways to ensure that. I traced possible routes in and out of the hollow, noting the locations of known cave systems. The Ozarks had thousands of caves, most of them unmapped and unexplored. They ranged from simple sinkholes to vast underground complexes that stretched for miles. Some connected to each other through underground rivers and passages that no human had ever seen. Others were dead ends, vertical shafts that dropped into chambers filled with water or mud. The cave we'd found could be any of those things. It could be a simple pit that dropped 30 feet and ended. Or it could be the entrance to something much larger, a system that extended deep into the mountain. We wouldn't know until we went down there. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off and pale morning light was filtering through my windows. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I forced myself up and into the shower. Today, we were going back into Blackburn Hollow, and I needed to be sharp. The team assembled at the station at 6:30. Besides June and me, there were the 2 sheriff's deputies from yesterday, 2 more rangers from a neighboring district, and 3 members of a volunteer cave rescue unit. We had ropes, climbing gear, lights, first aid equipment, and communication gear. If there was something in that cave, we were going to find it. Hendricks gave us a briefing before we left. Your primary objective is to determine what's in that cave and whether it's connected to the missing persons cases. Secondary objective is to figure out who left that map and why. Be careful. Watch each other's backs, and if anything feels wrong, you get out and call for backup. Understood? We all nodded. Despite the serious tone, there was an undercurrent of anticipation. This was what we'd trained for, even if we'd all hoped we'd never actually need it. The drive out to the access point was quiet. Everyone was focused, mentally preparing for what we might find. Rogers drove the lead vehicle with Martinez riding shotgun. June and I followed in her truck with 2 of the cave rescue volunteers, brothers named Tommy and Dale Prescott. The 3rd volunteer, a woman named Lisa Brooks, no relation to the missing Sarah Brooks, though the coincidence was unsettling, rode with the other rangers. When we reached the clearing where June and I had parked yesterday, there were already vehicles there. For a second I thought someone had beaten us to the site, but then I recognized the superintendent's truck and one of the park's utility vehicles. Hendricks had sent a couple rangers ahead to secure the area and make sure nobody wandered in while we were working. We geared up and headed into the forest. This time, the hike felt different. We weren't exploring anymore. We were investigating. Every sound, every movement in the underbrush got our attention. I found myself watching the trees, looking for any sign of the person who'd followed us yesterday. But the forest seemed empty, just birds and squirrels and the constant whisper of wind through the leaves. When we descended into Blackburn Hollow, that oppressive feeling returned immediately. The air grew cool and damp, the light dimmed, and that heavy silence settled over everything. Tommy Prescott whistled low under his breath. "This place has a vibe," he said quietly, "and not a good one." Nobody disagreed with him. We found our cairn marker easily, and June led us to the concealed entrance. The plywood was exactly as we'd left it, undisturbed. Rogers and Martinez did a quick perimeter search while the rest of us prepared the climbing gear. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been here since yesterday. Tommy and Dale set up the ropes, securing them to nearby trees and running them down into the cave entrance. They worked with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this hundreds of times. When they were done, Tommy clipped into his harness and clicked on his helmet light. "I'll go down first. Check it out," he said. "If it's safe, I'll call up and the rest of you can follow." We all watched as he rappelled down into the darkness, his light bouncing off the limestone walls. He hit bottom after about 15 feet, just as we'd estimated. We heard him moving around down there, his light sweeping back and forth. "What do you see?" June called down. "Chamber, about 20 feet across." Tommy's voice echoed up from the hole. "Ceiling's low, maybe 6 feet. There's a passage leading deeper into the cave system, looks like it slopes down. And..." He paused, and in that moment of silence my heart rate kicked up. "And what?" Rogers demanded. "There's something down here, something you need to see." One by one, we descended into the cave. June went first, then me, then Rogers and Martinez. The Rangers stayed topside to maintain security and communication. When I touched down on the cave floor, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Damp earth, limestone, and underneath it something else. Something organic and wrong. Tommy had his light pointed at the far wall of the chamber. As my eyes adjusted, I saw what had made him pause. There, arranged against the wall, were personal items. A backpack, a water bottle, a hiking boot. They were old, covered in cave sediment and mineral deposits, but they were definitely there. And next to them, driven into a crack in the rock, was a piece of metal that looked like it might have been a tent stake. "Don't touch anything," Rogers said immediately, pulling out her camera. "This is a crime scene now." She was right. Those items didn't get down here by accident. Someone had brought them here, or someone had been here and left them behind. The question was who and why. While Rogers photographed the items, Tommy and Dale examined the passage leading deeper into the cave. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it descended at a steep angle into darkness. "We need to see where this goes," June said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Agreed," Martinez said. "But we do it smart. 2 people go in with a safety line. Everyone else stays here and monitors. If anything goes wrong, we pull them back out." Tommy volunteered to lead, and after a moment's hesitation I said I'd go with him. I saw June start to protest, but I shook my head. I'd been the one to find the map. I needed to see this through. Tommy and I clipped into a safety line, checked our lights, and started into the passage. It was tight. We had to turn sideways in places, the limestone walls pressing in on both sides. The floor was slick with moisture and sloped downward at maybe a 30-degree angle. We moved slowly, carefully, testing each step before putting our weight on it. After about 50 feet, the passage opened up into another chamber, this one larger than the first. Tommy swept his light around and I heard him suck in a breath. "Jacob," he said quietly. "Look." The chamber was maybe 30 feet across, and the ceiling was high enough that our lights didn't quite reach it. But what grabbed our attention was the center of the room. There, arranged in a rough circle, were more personal items. Backpacks, camping gear, clothing, all of it old and covered in mineral deposits. And in the center of the circle, someone had built a cairn, a pile of rocks stacked carefully into a pyramid maybe 3 feet tall. But it was what was on top of the cairn that made my blood run cold. A human skull, yellowed with age, staring at us from empty eye sockets. I keyed my radio, my hand shaking. "We've got something down here. You need to see this." It took 15 minutes for the rest of the team to navigate the narrow passage and join us in the chamber. When Rogers saw the skull, she immediately got on her radio and called for more backup. This was way beyond what our small team could handle. While we waited, Tommy and Dale did a more thorough examination of the chamber. They found 3 more passages leading off in different directions, all of them narrow and descending deeper into the cave system. And around the perimeter of the room, they found more disturbing signs. Scratches on the walls, similar to the ones we'd seen at the entrance. Some looked like words, though they were too weathered to read clearly. Others looked like tally marks, dozens of them, scratched into the soft limestone. "Someone spent a lot of time down here," Dale said, running his gloved hand over the marks. This wasn't a quick in and out. We all stood there in that chamber, surrounded by the evidence of something terrible, trying to make sense of it. The skull on the cairn, the personal items arranged in a circle, the scratches on the walls, none of it pointed to anything good. Someone had been using this cave for something, and based on those missing persons reports, we all had a pretty good idea what that something was. But there were still questions. Why leave the map? Why lead us here? Was it guilt? Someone trying to make things right? Or was it something else, some kind of sick game? And more importantly, was the person who'd done this still out there? Were they the same person who'd followed June and me out of the hollow yesterday? Rogers made the decision to evacuate the cave and wait for the full forensic team. We carefully documented everything with photos and video, marked our locations on the GPS, and started the climb back to the surface. The trip up that narrow passage felt longer than the trip down, and I was grateful when I finally pulled myself out of the hole and back into the relative brightness of the hollow. The rangers who'd stayed topside had news. While we were underground, they'd heard someone moving through the forest. They'd called out, identified themselves as park rangers, but whoever it was had run. They'd tried to follow, but the person knew the terrain too well and disappeared into the dense underbrush. "Did you get a look at them?" Martinez asked. One of the rangers, a guy named Stevens, shook his head. "Not really. Male, I think, based on the build. Wearing dark clothing, that's all I can tell you. He was there for maybe 10 seconds before he bolted." So someone had been watching us. Someone who didn't want to be identified but also couldn't seem to stay away. The thought made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We hiked out of the hollow in a tight group, everyone alert and watching the trees. I kept my hand near my pistol the whole way, half expecting someone to step out and confront us. But the forest remained silent and still, keeping its secrets. Back at the station, Hendricks and the sheriff were waiting. We gave them a full report, and I could see the weight of it settling on Hendricks' shoulders. In all his years of service, he'd probably never dealt with anything like this. The sheriff, a man named Porter, looked equally grim. "We're bringing in the state police," Porter said, "and the FBI if needed. This is a multi-jurisdiction investigation now. Those missing persons cases are cold, but if we've found evidence related to them, we're going to work them until we have answers." Over the next several days, Blackburn Hollow became the center of a major investigation. Forensic teams went into the cave and carefully excavated the site. They found more remains, not complete skeletons, but bones scattered through the deeper passages. DNA analysis would take time, but the prevailing theory was that we'd found the final resting place of at least some of the missing hikers. The items in the cave were cataloged and analyzed. Some of them matched descriptions from the missing persons reports. Sarah Brooks's backpack, David Foster's distinctive red jacket, Emily Patterson's journal, too damaged by moisture and time to read but identifiable by her name written on the inside cover. They found other things, too. Things that didn't match any known missing persons. More bones, some of them much older based on their condition. Personal items that didn't correspond to any reported cases. It suggested that the 3 known missing persons weren't the only victims. There might have been others. People who'd gone into those mountains and never come out. People whose disappearances had never been reported or investigated. But through all of this, they never found the person who'd left the map. And they never caught whoever had been watching us in the hollow. The investigation consumed the next 2 weeks of my life. I gave statements, walked investigators through everything June and I had found, and helped coordinate the search efforts. The media picked up the story. Park Rangers Discover Cave of Horrors was one headline I remember, and suddenly Blackburn Hollow was infamous. But despite all the resources, all the expertise brought to bear, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The forensic team confirmed that the skull we'd found belonged to Sarah Brooks, the first missing hiker from 1992. DNA from other remains matched David Foster and Emily Patterson, but there were at least 2 other individuals whose bones were found in those caves, people who remained unidentified. The FBI ran missing persons searches going back decades, but couldn't find matches. Whoever these other victims were, either their disappearances had never been reported, or records had been lost over the years. The question of who was responsible remained unanswered. The items in the cave, the way the remains were arranged, the scratches on the walls, all of it suggested someone with knowledge of the cave system, someone who'd been using it for a long time. But there were no suspects, no DNA evidence that pointed to anyone specific. The investigation hit a wall. As for the map that started everything, forensic analysis revealed nothing useful. The paper was standard USGS stock, available anywhere. The marker used was a common Sharpie brand. No fingerprints, no trace evidence. Whoever left it had been careful not to leave any clues about their identity. 3 weeks after we found the cave, the superintendent called June and me into his office. Agent Reeves from the FBI was there, along with Sheriff Porter. The news wasn't good. "We're scaling back the active investigation," Reeves said, his voice neutral and professional. "We've done everything we can with the evidence available. The remains have been identified where possible and returned to families. The cave system has been thoroughly searched and documented, but without a suspect, without any leads pointing to who was responsible, there's not much more we can do." "So that's it?" June said, her voice tight with frustration. "Someone murdered at least 5 people and we just give up?" "We're not giving up," Porter said. "This case stays open. If new evidence comes to light, if someone comes forward with information, we'll pursue it aggressively. But right now, we've exhausted our active leads." Reeves pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk to June and me. "This is everything we know. I'm sharing this with you because you were the ones who found the site, and because you're going to be the ones here after we leave. If anything unusual happens, if you see anything that might be related, you contact me immediately." I opened the folder and scanned the summary inside. They'd developed a working theory about what had happened, though it was all speculation without evidence. Someone, probably a local who knew the area well, had been using Blackburn Hollow and its cave system for years, possibly decades. They'd targeted hikers, people who were alone or separated from groups, people whose disappearances might be attributed to getting lost in the wilderness. The victims were taken to the cave, killed there, and their remains were left in the deeper chambers where they'd never be found during standard searches. The person might have stopped years ago. The most recent remains dated to 1995, the year Emily Patterson went missing. Or they might have simply moved to a different location, a different hunting ground. There was no way to know. As for the map, that remained the biggest mystery. The prevailing theory was that it had been left by someone with knowledge of the crimes, either the perpetrator experiencing guilt or an accomplice who wanted to reveal the truth. But it was also possible it was completely unrelated, just a bizarre coincidence. That seemed unlikely, given how specifically the X marked the concealed cave entrance, but without more evidence, they couldn't rule it out. "What about the person who followed us?" I asked. "The person Stevens saw watching the investigation?" Reeves shrugged. "Could have been anyone. Curious local, someone from the media trying to get a story. Even just a hiker who got spooked when they saw all the official vehicles and ran. We can't prove it was connected to the crimes. After the meeting, June and I walked out to the parking lot together. The sun was setting, painting the Ozark Hills in shades of orange and red. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think about was that dark hollow and the secrets it had kept for so long. "You okay?" June asked. I thought about it. "No," I said honestly. "I don't think I am." She nodded. "Yeah, me neither." We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us dealing with the weight of what we'd found and the frustration of not having answers. Finally, June spoke again. "You know what bothers me most? That map. Someone left it where we'd find it. Someone wanted us to go to that cave, but why? If they wanted to do the right thing, wanted to help those families get closure, why not just call it in? Why the games?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since that first day. I didn't have an answer then, and I still didn't now. "Maybe they couldn't call it in without implicating themselves," I said. "Maybe they were involved somehow, but didn't actually kill anyone. An accomplice who wanted to make things right but couldn't risk being identified." "Maybe," June said, but she didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. Life slowly returned to normal after that, or as normal as it could be. The investigation wrapped up, the media moved on to other stories, and the park went back to its usual routines. But Blackburn Hollow was different now. The superintendent ordered the cave entrance permanently sealed with a concrete cap and steel grating. Warning signs were posted throughout the area. And though we couldn't stop people from hiking in that section of the park, we made it clear that the area was now considered hazardous and should be avoided. Most people listened. Visitation to that part of the park dropped significantly. The few hikers who did venture into the hollow usually turned back quickly, unsettled by the atmosphere or spooked by the warnings. The place had earned its reputation as somewhere you didn't want to be. I tried to move on, to focus on my work and put the whole experience behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not really. Someone had left that map knowing it would be found, knowing it would lead to the cave and the remains hidden inside. They'd done it deliberately, carefully, and then disappeared without a trace. That suggested a level of planning and control that was deeply unsettling. And then there was the fact that someone had been watching us, following June and me out of the hollow that first day, watching the investigation from the trees. The FBI had dismissed it as probably unrelated, but I wasn't so sure. It felt too coincidental, too deliberate. About a month after the investigation closed, I was doing a routine patrol on the hemmed-in hollow trail, the same trail where I'd found the map. It was a cool morning in late November, the last of the fall colors fading from the trees. The trail was empty. Weekday mornings in November didn't attract many hikers. I was approaching the second creek crossing, the same spot where I'd found the map, when I saw something that made me stop cold. There, on the exact same boulder where the first map had been, was another piece of paper. My first instinct was to radio it in immediately, to call for backup and treat it as a crime scene. But something stopped me. I approached slowly, my hand on my pistol, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. The woods were silent and still. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The paper was a photograph, I realized as I got closer. An old photograph, the kind printed on actual photo paper rather than from a digital printer. It was placed carefully on the rock, weighted down with a small stone to keep it from blowing away. I used a stick to move the stone, then carefully picked up the photograph by the edges. It showed a group of people, maybe 7 or 8 of them, standing in front of a cabin. The photo was old, probably from the 1980s based on the clothing and the quality of the image. The people were smiling, relaxed, like they were on a camping trip or vacation. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in pencil in careful handwriting, was a single sentence. They all went into the hollow. Only I came out. My hands started shaking. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some random piece of trash left by a hiker. This was a message, deliberately left for whoever might find it. For me, probably, since I'd found the first map. I immediately radioed the station and reported what I'd found. Within an hour, the area was swarming with Park Service and law enforcement. The photograph was logged as evidence and rushed to the FBI lab for analysis. Agent Reeves came back, along with a team of analysts. The people in the photograph were identified within days. They'd all been reported missing in 1987, a group of friends from Missouri who'd come to the Ozarks for a camping trip and never returned. Their vehicles had been found at a trailhead, their tents and gear scattered in a campsite, but no sign of the people themselves. It had been assumed they'd gotten lost in the wilderness and died of exposure, though no bodies were ever recovered. Until now, we hadn't known they'd gone into Blackburn Hollow. But the message on the back of the photo changed everything. Only I came out. That meant at least one person had survived whatever happened to the group. And that person had apparently been keeping this secret for over 30 years. The FBI ramped up the investigation again. They brought in more resources, interviewed everyone connected to the 1987 case, and dug through decades of records looking for any clue about the survivor. But once again, the trail went cold. Whoever had left the photograph had been careful to leave no trace of their identity. Reeves called me in for another interview. This one more intense than the previous ones. They wanted to know everything about my patrol that day, what time I'd been on the trail, whether I'd seen anyone, whether I'd heard anything unusual. I told them the truth. I'd seen nothing. The forest had been empty, silent, like it was waiting for something. "Why you?" Reeves asked at one point. "Why leave these things where you'll find them? What's the connection?" I didn't have an answer. I was just a ranger doing my job. There was nothing special about me, nothing that would make me a specific target for these messages unless it was simply that I'd found the first map, and now whoever was leaving these things saw me as the person to deliver them to. The photograph led to another search of Blackburn Hollow and the cave system. This time, they went deeper, exploring passages that hadn't been fully examined during the first investigation. And they found more remains, bones scattered through the deep chambers, some of them showing signs of trauma. DNA analysis would take months, but the preliminary assessment was that they'd found the missing campers from 1987. With each discovery, the scope of what had happened in that hollow grew darker and more extensive. We were no longer talking about 3 or 4 victims. We were talking about at least a dozen, possibly more, spanning more than a decade. Someone had been using Blackburn Hollow as a killing ground for years, and they'd been smart enough, careful enough, to never get caught. Until now, until they'd decided, for whatever reason, to start revealing their crimes. But why? That was the question that haunted me. Why leave the map? Why leave the photograph? What did they want? Attention? Recognition for their crimes? Or was it something else, some kind of twisted game where they got to watch us uncover what they'd done while remaining safely anonymous? I didn't know, but I did know one thing: they weren't done. The careful placement of the photograph, the deliberate messaging, it all suggested someone who wanted to continue communicating. And that meant there would be more. I was right. Over the next 6 months, 3 more items appeared on that boulder at the Second Creek crossing. Each time I found them during my regular patrols, and each time they revealed new horrors. The second item was a driver's license so old and weathered it was barely readable. The name on it was Thomas Garrett, and the issue date was 1979. The FBI determined that Garrett had been a drifter who'd passed through Arkansas in the early 1980s. He'd never been reported missing because he had no family, no permanent address, no one who'd notice he was gone. The cave searches found remains that were tentatively identified as his through dental records. The third item was a child's bracelet, a simple thing made of colored beads. This one hit everyone hard. A child. We'd been dealing with adult victims, hikers and campers who'd made the choice to go into the wilderness. But a child changed everything. The FBI worked frantically to identify where the bracelet had come from, running it against every missing child case in the region going back 40 years. They found a match. Amy Richardson, age 8, who disappeared during a family camping trip in 1983. Her body had never been found, and her family had spent decades not knowing what happened to her. The fourth item was a journal, leather-bound and water-damaged but still partially readable. It had belonged to someone named Marcus, and the entries detailed his time in the Ozarks in the late 1970s. He wrote about feeling watched, about finding strange markings on trees, about hearing sounds in the forest that didn't match any animal he knew. The last entry was dated 3 days before he stopped writing. It simply said, "I found the hollow. I'm going to explore the caves tomorrow. If anyone finds this, tell my mother I love her." They never found remains that could be definitively linked to Marcus, but the journal was enough. Another victim, another life ended in those dark caves. With each discovery, the FBI's profile of the killer grew more detailed and more disturbing. They were looking for someone with extensive knowledge of the area, possibly someone who'd lived in the region for decades, someone physically capable of subduing victims and transporting them into the difficult terrain of the hollow, someone organized and patient enough to kill over a span of years without being caught. And now, someone who was deliberately revealing their crimes for reasons that remained unclear. But they still had no suspects, no DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, just the carefully placed items and the growing list of victims. The stress was taking its toll on everyone. June became withdrawn, spending more time than necessary on solo patrols, avoiding the station and the constant questions from investigators. Hendricks looked like he'd aged 10 years, the weight of all those deaths happening on Park Service land clearly bearing down on him. And me, I was barely sleeping, jumping at shadows, and constantly scanning the forest for whoever was watching us. Because I was convinced they were watching. Every time I found something on that boulder, I could feel eyes on me. Not directly threatening, but observing, studying my reaction. It was a violation, being watched like that, being made part of whatever sick game this person was playing. The sixth item appeared in March, almost a full year after I'd found the original map. It was the last one, though I didn't know that at the time. When I approached the boulder that morning and saw something waiting there, I felt the familiar combination of dread and grim determination. Whatever it was, it would lead to more victims, more families getting the worst news possible. But it would also be another piece of the puzzle, another step toward finding whoever was responsible. The item was an envelope, manila and weathered but sealed. My name was written on it in that same careful handwriting I'd seen on the photograph. Jacob Renner. They'd been leaving these things for me specifically. I'd known it intellectually, but seeing my name written there made it viscerally real. This person knew who I was. They'd been watching me for a year, observing my patrols, timing their drops for when I'd be the one to find them. I radioed it in and waited for the investigative team before opening the envelope. Reeves arrived within the hour, and we carefully opened it together. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. I am the one who survived. I am the one who knows what happened in the hollow. I am the one who has carried this burden for 33 years. The others are free now. Their families know. The dead can rest, but I cannot. I will never be free of what I saw, what I survived, what I became. You want to know who killed them. You want justice, closure, answers. But some answers destroy the people who seek them. Some truths are better left buried in the dark. I have shown you enough. The map, the photograph, the items, they are my confession and my memorial. The dead are honored. The families have closure. That is all I can give. Do not look for me. You will not find me. And if you do, you will wish you had not. This is the last you will hear from me. Let the dead rest. Let the hollow keep its secrets. Move on with your life, Jacob Renner. Forget you ever found that map. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some darkness once seen can never be unseen. I opened that door long ago. I saw that darkness, and it has consumed me. Do not make the same mistake. We read it 3 times, analyzing every word, every phrase. It was a confession, sort of. An admission that the writer had survived something in the hollow, something connected to all the deaths. But it was also a warning and an ending. They were done communicating. This was their final message. The FBI analyzed the letter for days. The typing was generic, probably from a common printer. The paper was standard office stock. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing useful. And the message itself was carefully worded to avoid any specific details that might identify the writer. We knew they'd survived something in 1987, that they'd been part of the group in the photograph. But which one? Were they a victim who'd escaped? Or were they the perpetrator, overcome with guilt after decades of silence? Reeves leaned toward the latter theory. The language suggests guilt and self-loathing, he explained. Phrases like, "what I became," and "it has consumed me." That's not how survivors of violent crime typically describe their trauma. That's how perpetrators describe their actions. But there was another possibility, one that made my skin crawl when I thought about it. What if the writer was both victim and perpetrator? What if they'd survived something horrible in the hollow, something that had changed them and then they'd continued the cycle? What if the trauma had broken something inside them, turned them into the very thing they'd escaped from? I thought about the message's warning. Some darkness, once seen, can never be unseen. What had they seen in that hollow? What had happened to the group in 1987 that killed everyone except the writer? And what had the experience done to the survivor? We would never know. The messages stopped after that letter. The boulder at the second creek crossing remained empty week after week, month after month. Whoever had been communicating with us had apparently meant what they said. They were done. The FBI kept the case open, kept running down leads and analyzing evidence. But without new information, without any way to identify the writer of that letter, there was little they could do. Eventually, Reeves and his team packed up and left, promising to return if anything new developed. But nothing did develop. Blackburn Hollow fell silent again, keeping whatever secrets remained buried in its dark earth. It's been 5 years now since I found that map. I'm still a ranger in the Ozarks, though I've transferred to a different district. I couldn't stay at Buffalo Point, couldn't keep patrolling those trails knowing what they'd seen. June left the Park Service entirely, moved to Colorado, last I heard. Hendricks retired early, his health broken by the stress of it all. The families of the victims got some closure at least. They know what happened to their loved ones, even if they don't know all the details. Some of them have been grateful, sending letters thanking us for bringing their family members home. Others have been angry, demanding to know why we haven't caught whoever was responsible. I understand both reactions. As for me, I still think about it. I think about that map on the boulder, so carefully placed. I think about the messages that followed, each one revealing new horrors. And I think about that final letter, with its warning and its plea to let things rest. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if we should have listened. Maybe some things are better left buried. Maybe some doors should stay closed. But we opened that door. We shone light into that darkness, and now we have to live with what we found. The writer of that letter was right about one thing. Some darkness, once seen, can never be unseen. I've seen things in my career that I'll never forget. Deaths, accidents, the cruelty humans can inflict on each other and on nature. But nothing has stayed with me like Blackburn Hollow and its secrets. I still patrol forests and mountains. I still help lost hikers and protect wilderness areas, but I'm more careful now, more aware of what might be hiding just off the trail. The wilderness is beautiful, but it's also dangerous. And sometimes, the most dangerous things in it aren't the animals or the terrain. Sometimes, they're the people who know how to use that wilderness to hide their crimes. If you're reading this, if you're planning to hike in the Ozarks or any other wild place, be careful. Stay on the trails. Don't go off alone. And if you see something that doesn't belong, a map, a photograph, any item that seems deliberately placed, report it to the authorities. Because it might be nothing, just trash left by a careless hiker. Or it might be something else. Something left by someone who wants to communicate but can't risk being identified. Someone with secrets they can no longer bear to keep, but are too afraid to fully reveal. And whatever you do, if you find yourself in a place like Blackburn Hollow, a place that feels wrong, that feels heavy with old darkness, turn around. Leave. Don't let curiosity lead you into places better left unexplored. Some hollows keep their secrets for good reason. Some caves should stay sealed, and some maps should never be followed. I learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you never have to learn it at all. There are places in the Ozark Mountains that feel wrong. Not dangerous in the obvious way. No cliffs about to collapse, no angry wildlife, nothing you can point to and say, that's the problem. Just a feeling, deep in your gut, that tells you to turn around and leave. That you're not welcome. That something about this particular stretch of forest doesn't want you there. The old Grafton hunting cabin was one of those places. My name is Maddie Sanford, and I've been a ranger in the Buffalo National River area for 7 years now. I've seen a lot in that time. Lost hikers, illegal poachers, the occasional marijuana grow operation hidden deep in the hollers. I've pulled drowning victims from the river and talked down suicidal campers standing at the edge of bluffs. But nothing in my training, nothing in my experience, prepared me for what happened at that cabin in the winter of 2021. The Grafton cabin sat about 4 miles into the backcountry, accessible only by a rough trail that most hikers avoided. It had been built sometime in the 1950s by a local family who'd used it as a hunting camp back when this was all private land, before the Park Service acquired it. When the land became part of the National River area, the cabin should have been torn down, but it was so remote and in such poor condition that the Park Service just left it. Officially, it was listed as a historical structure on the inventory, but really, everyone had just forgotten about it. I'd been out there once before, 3 years earlier, doing a boundary survey. The cabin had been falling apart then, roof sagging, windows broken, door hanging off its hinges. Animals had clearly been using it for shelter. There was raccoon scat everywhere, and the wooden floor was rotting through in places. It was the kind of place that would probably collapse completely within another decade. So, when Clayton Harris radioed me on a freezing February night to say he'd seen smoke coming from that direction, I thought he had to be mistaken. "You sure it's not just fog?" I asked, pulling on my boots. It was almost 11 at night, and I'd been getting ready for bed at the ranger station. "I know the difference between fog and smoke, Maddie," Clayton said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. Clayton was in his late 50s, a veteran ranger who'd been working these mountains since before I was born. If he said he saw smoke, he saw smoke. "I'm at the overlook on Hickory Ridge," he continued. "I can see it clear as day. There's definitely a fire burning in that cabin, or near it. You want to wait until morning to check it out?" I thought about it. Fire in the backcountry was always a concern, even in February. If someone had started a fire in that old cabin, the whole structure could go up, and if the wind was wrong, it could spread to the surrounding forest. Dry winters meant dry undergrowth, and we'd had very little rain in the past month. "No," I said, "I'll head out now. You want to meet me at the trailhead?" "Already on my way," Clayton said. 20 minutes later, we were standing at the trailhead with our packs, headlamps, and service weapons. The temperature was dropping fast, probably in the low 30s, and our breath came out in visible clouds. The forest around us was silent, that deep winter silence when most of the animals are bedded down and even the wind seems to hold its breath. "You really think someone's staying in that cabin?" I asked as we started up the trail. Clayton shook his head. "Can't imagine why they would. Place is a death trap. But I saw smoke, and smoke means fire, and fire means people, or at least it should." The trail was rough and overgrown, barely visible even with our headlamps. We'd been walking for about 30 minutes when Clayton stopped suddenly, holding up his hand. I froze, listening. At first I heard nothing, just the sound of our breathing and the soft crunch of frozen leaves under our boots. Then I heard it. A distant sound, rhythmic and hollow, like wood striking wood. "Someone's chopping firewood," Clayton said quietly. We stood there for a long moment, both of us trying to make sense of it. Who would be out here at this hour, in the middle of winter, chopping wood at an abandoned hunting cabin? Squatters, maybe, though it seemed like an odd place to squat. There were warmer, more accessible spots closer to town, and the sound had an odd quality to it, like it was echoing from somewhere far away, even though we were getting close to the cabin. "Should we call it in?" I asked. Clayton considered it, then shook his head. "Let's get eyes on the situation first. Could be nothing. Could be some fool who doesn't realize the cabin's on federal land." We continued forward, moving slower now, more cautiously. The chopping sound stopped after a few minutes, which somehow made the silence feel even more oppressive. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, that familiar prickle of being watched crawling up my spine. The cabin came into view about 20 minutes later. My first thought was that it looked different from how I remembered it. Not better exactly, but occupied. The door was closed, not hanging open like before, and there was definitely smoke coming from the stone chimney. Not much, just a thin gray ribbon rising into the dark sky, but enough to confirm what Clayton had seen from the ridge. More unsettling was the light. There was a faint orange glow visible through the gaps in the boarded windows, the kind of light you'd get from a fire or maybe an oil lamp. Someone was definitely inside. Clayton and I exchanged a look. His hand moved to rest on his service weapon, not drawing it, but ready if needed. I did the same. "Park Rangers," Clayton called out, his voice authoritative and loud in the silence. "Anyone inside the cabin, come out with your hands visible." Nothing, no response, no movement, no change in that flickering light. "This is federal land," Clayton tried again. "You need to identify yourself and come out immediately." Still nothing. I felt my heart rate picking up. Something about this situation felt off. If it was just squatters or lost hikers, they'd respond. They might be scared or defensive, but they'd at least acknowledge us. This silence felt deliberate, like whoever was inside knew we were here and was choosing not to answer. "I'm going to approach the door," I said quietly to Clayton. "Cover me?" He nodded, unsnapping his holster. I moved forward slowly, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. As I got closer to the cabin, I could smell it. Wood smoke, yes, but also something else. Something organic and slightly sweet, like meat that had been cooking too long. It wasn't a pleasant smell, and it made my stomach turn. I reached the door, old wooden planks held together with rusted nails and a metal latch. My hand hovered over the latch for a moment as I tried to peer through the gaps in the wood. All I could see was that flickering orange light and shadows moving across the interior walls. "Park rangers," I said again, louder this time. "We're coming in." I lifted the latch, it wasn't locked, and pushed the door open. The interior of the cabin was nothing like I remembered. 3 years ago, it had been a wreck. Garbage everywhere, holes in the roof, animals nesting in the corners. But now it was neat. The floor had been swept, the broken furniture had been arranged almost purposefully, and there was a fire burning in the old stone fireplace. Not a big fire, just enough to provide light and a little heat. And on the rough wooden table in the center of the room sat 2 coffee cups. I stepped inside slowly, my hand still on my weapon. The cups were ceramic, old and chipped, the kind you might find at a thrift store. Both were full of dark liquid, coffee presumably based on the smell mixing with the wood smoke. And both were steaming slightly, like they'd just been poured. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" The cabin was only one room, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with the fireplace on one wall and a single small window on each of the other walls. There was nowhere to hide. No closets, no back rooms, nothing. But there were definitely 2 cups of hot coffee sitting on that table, which meant someone had been here very recently. Clayton came in behind me, and I heard his sharp intake of breath when he saw the cups. "Where did they go?" he asked quietly. That was the question. The only door was the one we'd come through, and we'd been watching it. The windows were boarded from the inside and hadn't been disturbed. I could see the old nails still in place, covered in rust and cobwebs. There was no way someone could have gone out through them without making noise and leaving obvious signs. I approached the table carefully and held my hand near one of the cups without touching it. Heat radiated from the ceramic. This coffee had been poured within the last few minutes, maybe even while we were approaching the cabin. "Check the rest of the room," I said to Clayton. "Look for any way someone could have gotten out." While he searched, I examined the cups more closely. They were definitely old, the kind of heavy ceramic that hadn't been made in decades. One had a faded logo on it, so worn I couldn't make out what it said. The other was plain white with a chip on the rim. The coffee itself was black, no cream or sugar visible, and when I leaned close, I could smell it. Strong, bitter, and fresh. "Maddie," Clayton said from the corner of the room. "You need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing near the fireplace. He was pointing at something on the wall above the mantel. Carved into the old wood, barely visible in the firelight, were words. They looked old, the edges of the letters weathered and darkened with age. "We came together, we left alone." Below that, carved in what looked like a different hand, pressure marks. "Waiting." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the February cold. Those words felt like a message, or maybe a warning. And whoever had carved the second word had done it recently. The wood inside the letters was still relatively light-colored, not darkened like the first carving. "I don't like this," Clayton said quietly, and I noticed his hand had moved back to his weapon. "Me neither," I admitted. "But someone was just here. We need to search the area, figure out where they went." We left the cabin, leaving the door open behind us. I made a mental note of everything I'd seen. The 2 cups, the fresh coffee, the carvings, the impossibility of anyone having left without us seeing them. None of it made sense, but that didn't matter right now. What mattered was finding whoever had been in that cabin. Clayton pulled out his flashlight and started walking the perimeter of the structure, shining his light on the ground. The earth around the cabin was mostly bare rock and frozen soil, not great for tracking, but after a few minutes he called out, "Maddie, come look at this." I jogged over to where he stood at the back corner of the cabin. He was pointing his light at the ground, illuminating a strange pattern in the dirt. At first, I thought it was just a natural formation, maybe an old drainage channel or something. But as I looked closer, I realized what I was seeing. Footprints. Sort of. It wasn't a trail in the traditional sense. Instead of 2 parallel tracks showing left and right footprints, there was just one line of depressions in the earth, like someone had been walking with both feet on a tightrope, placing each foot directly in front of the other. The prints were evenly spaced, heading away from the cabin and into the darker forest beyond. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the trail only went one direction. The prints led away from the cabin, deeper into the woods, but there were no corresponding tracks leading to the cabin. It was as if whoever had made them had materialized inside the cabin, drunk their coffee, or made their coffee, or whatever they'd done, and then walked out and into the forest in a perfectly straight line. "That's not possible," I said, though I was looking right at it. "Yeah," Clayton agreed. "It's not." We followed the trail. It led through the woods in an almost unnaturally straight line, weaving between trees but never deviating from its course. The prints were shallow, barely visible in places, but they were definitely there. Whoever had made them was either very light or had been moving carefully, trying not to leave much of a track. After about 100 yards, the trail ended. Not gradually, it just stopped, right in the middle of a small clearing. The last print was maybe 3 feet from a large oak tree, and after that, nothing. The ground beyond was undisturbed, covered in a thin layer of frost that showed no signs of being walked on. Clayton and I stood there, our flashlights illuminating the end of the trail, both of us trying to process what we were seeing. "Could they have climbed the tree?" I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Clayton shone his light up into the branches. The tree was big, probably 80 feet tall, with thick branches starting about 15 feet up. "Possible," he said, "but unlikely. You'd need a running start to jump that high, and there's no sign of that in the prints. Plus, it's freezing. Who climbs a tree in the middle of the night in 30-degree weather?" He was right. None of this made sense. The coffee, the carvings, the single line of footprints that appeared from nowhere and ended in the middle of a clearing. It felt less like a tracking problem and more like a logic puzzle with missing pieces. "We need to call this in," Clayton said. "Get more people out here, do a proper search of the area." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a larger search wouldn't find anything. Whoever or whatever had been in that cabin was gone, and they'd left behind more questions than answers. We hiked back to the cabin. The fire was still burning, and the coffee cups were still on the table, still warm. I put my hand near them again. They'd cooled slightly, but were still warmer than room temperature. That coffee couldn't have been more than 15 or 20 minutes old when we first entered the cabin. Clayton radioed the main station and reported what we'd found. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but agreed to send additional rangers at first light. In the meantime, we were to secure the scene and wait. We spent the rest of the night taking turns watching the cabin from outside, neither of us wanting to stay inside with those cups and those carvings. Nothing happened. The fire eventually burned down to embers. The coffee eventually went cold, and as the sun started to rise over the Ozark hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the whole thing felt almost dreamlike, like maybe we'd imagined the whole thing. But we hadn't. The cups were still there, the carvings were still there. And when we went back to examine that trail of prints in the daylight, they were still there too, leading from the cabin into the clearing and then just stopping. By 8 in the morning, we had 4 more rangers on site, along with the county sheriff's deputy who'd been in the area. Everyone saw the same things we had: the cups, the trail, the impossible ending. And everyone had the same reaction: confusion mixed with unease. The lead ranger, a woman named Sarah Kowalski, who'd been with the Park Service for 20 years, made the decision to treat it as a potential crime scene. The cups were photographed and bagged as evidence. The carvings were documented. The trail was measured and mapped, and the cabin was locked and marked as off-limits pending further investigation. "You think someone's messing with us?" I asked Sarah as we hiked back to the trailhead. She shook her head. "I don't know. If it's a prank, it's an elaborate one. And the timing is weird. Middle of the night, middle of winter, in a cabin that's miles from anywhere. Who goes to that much trouble?" "Someone who knows these woods," Clayton offered. "Someone who knows about the cabin, knows ranger patrol schedules, knows how to move through the backcountry without leaving obvious tracks." "A local, then," Sarah said. "Or a former ranger, maybe someone who used to work this district." That thought sat heavy with all of us as we walked. The idea that someone with inside knowledge, someone who understood how we operated, was playing games with us was deeply unsettling. But there was another possibility, one that nobody wanted to voice, but that I'm sure we were all thinking. What if it wasn't a game? What if those cups and that trail were evidence of something else, something we didn't understand yet, something that would make sense once we had all the pieces? I thought about the carvings again. We came together, we left alone. And then, in fresher cuts, waiting. Waiting for what? Or waiting for whom? Back at the station, I spent the afternoon writing up my incident report while Sarah coordinated with the sheriff's department and the park superintendent. The cups had been sent to a lab for analysis. They'd check for fingerprints, DNA, anything that might tell us who'd been handling them. The coffee itself would be tested to see if it contained anything unusual. Results wouldn't come back for days, maybe weeks. In the meantime, all we could do was wait and wonder. That night, lying in my bunk at the ranger station, I couldn't stop thinking about the cabin, about those warm cups sitting on that table, steam rising in the cold air, about the trail that went only one direction, about the words carved above the fireplace. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that whoever had left those cups wanted us to find them, wanted us to follow that trail, that this was just the beginning of something. I was right about that last part, but I had no idea just how dark this would get before it was over. The lab results came back 4 days later, and they didn't tell us much. The coffee cups had no identifiable fingerprints. They'd been wiped clean, probably deliberately. The coffee itself was just coffee. Nothing unusual or suspicious about it. Store-bought grounds, brewed, strong, black. The cups themselves were old, manufactured sometime in the 1960s or 70s, consistent with the age of the cabin. The only interesting finding was trace DNA on the rim of one cup, but it wasn't enough for a full profile. The lab tech said it might be usable for comparison if we found a suspect, but it wasn't enough to run through databases and get a hit. So we were back to square one. Someone had been in that cabin, made coffee, and left in a way that seemed physically impossible. And we had no idea who or why. Sarah Kowalski made the decision to increase patrols in that area of the park. Rangers would check on the cabin every few days, look for signs of new activity, and try to establish whether this was a one-time thing or an ongoing problem. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. The cabin remained locked and empty. No more smoke was reported. The trail of footprints gradually faded as wind and weather wore them away. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be with that mystery hanging over us. Then, on a Tuesday night in early March, my radio crackled to life just as I was finishing dinner. "Maddie, you copy?" It was Clayton's voice, and he sounded tense. "I copy. What's up?" "I'm at the overlook again, the cabin. There's smoke." My stomach dropped. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. Same as last time. Thin stream coming from the chimney. I'm looking at it right now." I grabbed my gear and was out the door within 5 minutes. Clayton met me at the trailhead, and we made the hike again, moving faster this time because we knew the trail. Neither of us spoke much. We were both thinking the same thing. Whoever this was, they'd come back, and maybe this time we'd catch them. We approached the cabin more carefully than before, splitting up to come at it from 2 directions so there'd be no chance of someone slipping past us. Clayton took the front while I circled around to the back, moving slowly and quietly through the underbrush. When I reached my position behind the cabin, I could see the smoke rising from the chimney. The place looked exactly as it had before. Door closed, faint light visible through the gaps in the boards, like someone was inside, making themselves comfortable. "In position," I radioed quietly to Clayton. "Copy." On 3, we both call out. 1, 2, 3. "Park Rangers," we shouted in unison, our voices echoing through the dark forest. "Exit the cabin with your hands visible." I waited, watching the back wall for any sign of movement, any hint that someone was trying to escape, but there was nothing. Just that smoke continuing to rise, and that flickering light continuing to glow. After 30 seconds with no response, Clayton moved to the door. I heard him call out one more warning, then the sound of the door opening. A moment later, his voice came over the radio. "Maddie, get in here." I circled around to the front and entered the cabin. It was the same scene as before, exactly the same. Fire in the fireplace, burning steadily. 2 cups on the table, still steaming. The room warm and neat, everything in its place. And absolutely no sign of any human presence beyond those cups. "This is impossible," Clayton said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. We were watching, both of us. Nobody left this cabin. He was right. This time we'd been more careful, more thorough. And yet somehow whoever had been here had vanished again. I approached the table, and that's when I noticed something different. This time, there was something next to the cups. A piece of paper, yellowed and old, folded once. I pulled on a pair of gloves from my pack and carefully opened it. It was a note, handwritten in pencil. The writing was old-fashioned, careful, like someone had taken their time with each letter. It read, "2 went into the woods, only 1 came back. But which one? The cabin knows." Below that, in fresher pencil marks that hadn't faded like the rest, "Don't look for us, look for what we found." I showed the note to Clayton. His face went pale as he read it. "What the hell does that mean?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. The note felt like a riddle, or maybe a warning. 2 went into the woods, only 1 came back. That could mean anything. A hiking accident? Something more sinister? And what did it mean that the cabin knew? And who had added that second line, and what had they found? "We need to search this place," I said. "Top to bottom. There has to be something here we're missing." We spent the next hour going over every inch of that cabin. We checked the floorboards for loose panels, examined the walls for hidden compartments, even climbed up to check the rafters and the chimney. Clayton went outside and checked the foundation, looking for any kind of cellar or crawl space. We found nothing. The cabin was exactly what it appeared to be. A simple one-room structure with stone walls, a wooden floor, and a shake roof. No hidden rooms, no secret passages, nowhere for a person to hide. But we did find something else. Behind the fireplace, hidden in a gap between the stones, was a small metal box. It was old, rusted at the edges, and it rattled when I pulled it out. Clayton and I looked at each other before I carefully opened it. Inside were photographs. Maybe 20 of them, all old, the colors faded and the edges worn. They showed people, men and women in clothing from what looked like the 1960s or 70s. Some were posed portraits smiling at the camera. Others were candid shots, people hiking or sitting around a campfire or standing in front of this very cabin. I flipped through them slowly. Many of the same faces appeared in multiple photos. A core group of maybe 6 or 7 people who seemed to have been friends or family. They were young in the earlier photos, probably in their 20s, and the later photos showed them aging into their 30s and 40s. Then I found the photo that made my blood run cold. It showed 2 men standing in front of the cabin. Both were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders in the easy way of good friends. The photo was dated on the back in faded ink, October 1973. But what caught my attention was what was written below the date. 2 names, written in that same old-fashioned hand, James Grafton and Michael Torrance. And below that, in different handwriting, fresher pencil marks, only one came home. Grafton. The cabin was called the Grafton Cabin because it had been built by the Grafton family back in the 50s. And now we had a photo from 1973 showing James Grafton and someone named Michael Torrance, with a note suggesting that only one of them had survived whatever happened. "We need to find out about these people," I said, holding up the photo. "See if there are any records, any reports about them." Clayton nodded, pulling out his phone to take pictures of the photos before we bagged them as evidence. "I'll check with the sheriff's department when we get back. If something happened to one of these guys in 1973, there should be a record of it." We finished documenting everything, locked the cabin again, and hiked out. But this time, I couldn't resist checking that spot behind the cabin where we'd found the trail of footprints before. Sure enough, there it was again, a single line of prints heading into the forest going only one direction, ending in the same clearing at the same oak tree. Except this time, there was something at the end of the trail that hadn't been there before. A small cairn of stones, carefully stacked into a pyramid maybe a foot tall, and on top of it, another piece of paper held down by a rock. I picked it up with gloved hands and unfolded it. The message was short. "He's still walking. He'll walk forever, unless you find what we couldn't." Clayton read it over my shoulder. "This is getting way too weird," he said quietly. I couldn't argue with that. We were well past weird and heading into territory I didn't have a name for. The next morning, I started digging into the history. The Park Service had old records going back to when the land was acquired, and I spent hours going through filing cabinets and digitized documents looking for any mention of Grafton or Torrance. I found it in a report from November 1973. James Grafton and Michael Torrance had been hunting together near what was then the Grafton family property. Only Grafton had returned, showing up at the local sheriff's office 3 days later, disheveled and disoriented. He claimed that Torrance had gotten separated from him in the woods and that despite extensive searching, he hadn't been able to find his friend. A search party was organized, and they combed through the area for a week. They never found Michael Torrance. No body, no camping gear, no sign of what happened to him. The case was eventually closed as a missing person, presumed dead in a hunting accident, but there was a note in the file that caught my attention. One of the search party members, a local named Earl Hickman, had reported finding something strange during the search. He'd discovered a trail of footprints that led in a straight line for over a quarter mile before simply ending in the middle of a clearing. When questioned, Hickman admitted it might have been an animal trail that he'd misinterpreted, and the detail was dismissed. A trail of footprints, leading in one direction, ending in a clearing, just like what we'd found. I kept digging. What happened to James Grafton? There wasn't much in the Park Service record, so I called the County Historical Society. The woman who answered was elderly, her voice crackling over the phone, but she remembered the Grafton family. "James Grafton," she said slowly. "Yes, I remember him. Poor man. Lost his best friend in a hunting accident back in the 70s. Never quite recovered from it." "Do you know what happened to him?" I asked. "He moved away not long after. Sold the property to the government when they were expanding the National River area. This would have been, 1975 or thereabouts. Heard he went out west somewhere. Colorado or Wyoming, I think. Never came back to Arkansas." "Did he have any family? Anyone still in the area?" "Not that I know of. He was an only child, and his parents had both passed by the time of the accident. As far as I know, there's nobody left." I thanked her and hung up, thinking about what I'd learned. James Grafton and Michael Torrance had gone hunting together. Only Grafton came back. Torrance was never found, despite extensive searches that included finding a strange trail that ended inexplicably, and Grafton had sold the property and left, never to return. 2 went into the woods. Only 1 came back. The note's meaning was starting to become clearer, but that raised more questions than it answered. If this was all related to something that happened in 1973, nearly 50 years ago, who was leaving these messages now? Who was making coffee in that cabin and walking into the forest in the middle of the night? Clayton had been doing his own research, and he came into my office that afternoon with a printout of something he'd found online. "Look at this," he said, spreading the paper on my desk. It was an obituary from a Wyoming newspaper dated 6 months ago. James Grafton had died at age 73 in a nursing home outside of Casper. The obituary was brief, noting that he'd been a veteran, an outdoorsman, and that he'd spent most of his life in Wyoming after moving from Arkansas in his youth. No surviving family was listed. "So Grafton's dead," I said. "Which means he's not the one leaving these messages." "Right," Clayton agreed. "But look at this part." He pointed to a line near the end of the obituary. "Grafton's remains were cremated per his wishes, with ashes to be scattered at a location meaningful to him." "Okay, so?" "So I called the funeral home in Casper, told them I was with the Park Service looking into a possible connection to our jurisdiction. They confirmed that Grafton's ashes were sent to someone, an attorney handling his estate. I got the attorney's name and called him too." Clayton pulled out another piece of paper. Grafton left instructions in his will. His ashes were to be delivered to the Grafton cabin in Arkansas and scattered there by a specific person, someone named Dale Torrance. My stomach did a flip. "Torrance. Michael Torrance's son," Clayton finished. I did some more digging. Dale Torrance is Michael's son. He was only 5 years old when his dad disappeared in 1973. He's in his 50s now, lives in Little Rock, works as an accountant. This was starting to come together, but not in a way that made me feel better. Dale Torrance, son of the man who disappeared, had been tasked with bringing James Grafton's ashes back to the cabin where his father was last seen. But why? And was Dale the one leaving the messages and the coffee cups? "We need to talk to Dale Torrance," I said. Clayton nodded. "I already got his contact information. Want me to set up a meeting?" "Yeah, the sooner the better." 2 days later, Dale Torrance drove up from Little Rock to meet with us at the Park Service office. He was a quiet man, slim and balding, with sad eyes that seemed to carry a weight I could only imagine. He'd agreed to meet with us without hesitation, and when he arrived, he was carrying a cardboard box. "Thank you for seeing us," I said, as we settled into one of the conference rooms. "I know this must be strange." Dale shook his head. "Not as strange as what I've been dealing with," he said quietly. He set the box on the table. "I think we need to talk about what's been happening at that cabin." "You know about it?" Clayton asked. "I know there's something wrong there," Dale said. "I've known it since I was a kid. My whole life I've known something was wrong about what happened to my father." He opened the box and pulled out a file folder, old and worn. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, letters, the history of Michael Torrance's disappearance, collected over decades. "James Grafton was my father's best friend," Dale began. "They'd known each other since they were kids. They went to school together, served in Vietnam together, came home and stayed close. They went hunting every year at that cabin." He pulled out a photo, similar to the one we'd found in the cabin. Michael and James, young and smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. In October 1973, they went hunting like always. But only James came back. He told the police that my dad had gotten separated from him, that he'd searched for days but couldn't find him. Everyone accepted that story. Hunting accidents happen. People get lost in the Ozarks. It was tragic, but it wasn't suspicious. "But you didn't believe it," I said gently. Dale looked at me with those sad eyes. "James Grafton was never the same after that trip. My mother saw him a few times before he moved away. She said he looked haunted, like he'd seen something that broke him, and he would never talk about what really happened, just stuck to his story. They got separated. He looked for my dad. He couldn't find him." Dale pulled out another document, a letter. "When I was 18, I hired a private investigator to look into my father's disappearance. He didn't find much, but he did interview some people who'd been on the search party. One of them, Earl Hickman, told him about finding that trail of footprints. Single line, going one direction, ending in a clearing. The official report dismissed it, but Hickman swore it was real." "We found the same thing," Clayton said. "Same pattern, same clearing, even." Dale nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd suspected. "I always thought there was more to the story. And when James Grafton died and his attorney contacted me, I knew I was right." He pulled out another letter, this one recent. Grafton left a confession. Not a legal confession, he never admitted to any crime, but a letter explaining what really happened that October. Dale slid the letter across the table to us. Clayton and I leaned forward to read it. The letter was handwritten, the writing shaky and uncertain, like it had been written by someone very old or very unwell. It was dated 3 months before Grafton's death. "To whom it may concern," it began, "I have carried a burden for nearly 50 years, and I will not carry it to my grave. What happened in October 1973 was not an accident, and Michael Torrance did not simply get lost in the woods. Something else happened, something I have never been able to explain or understand, but something that was real and terrible, and that has haunted me every day since. Michael and I went hunting as we did every year. We set up camp at my family's cabin and spent the first day scouting the area. Everything was normal, but on the second night, Michael said he heard something outside. Footsteps, he said, walking around the cabin. I didn't hear anything, but he was insistent. He grabbed his rifle and went outside to check. I waited inside for maybe 5 minutes. When he didn't come back, I went looking for him. I found him standing about 50 yards from the cabin, staring into the trees. He wasn't moving. wasn't responding when I called his name, just standing there perfectly still. I approached him and put my hand on his shoulder. That's when he turned to look at me, and I swear to God it wasn't Michael looking back. His eyes were wrong, empty, like he was there but not there, if that makes any sense. Then he smiled, not a normal smile, but something cold and terrible, and he walked away into the forest. Just started walking, not following any trail, just going in a straight line through the trees. I called after him, tried to follow, but he was moving faster than should have been possible. Within seconds, he was out of sight. I searched all night. I found his trail, footprints in the dirt and leaves, but only going one direction, no sign of him coming back. I followed it for what felt like hours until it ended in a clearing. Just stopped, like he'd vanished into thin air. I never found him. The search parties never found him. But I know what I saw. Something took Michael that night. Something in those woods claimed him and made him walk. And I don't think he ever stopped. I think he's still out there, still walking, trapped in some way I can't understand. I left Arkansas because I couldn't face what happened. I couldn't face Michael's family, couldn't face that cabin, couldn't face those woods. But it followed me. In my dreams, I see him walking, always walking, never stopping, that empty expression on his face, and I know that when I die, I'll walk too. Because we made a promise, Michael and I, years before, that whoever died first, we'd wait for the other. We'd have one last hunt together. I'm old now, dying, and I'm not afraid of death, but I'm afraid of what comes after. I'm afraid I'll end up like Michael, walking forever in those woods, trapped between here and whatever comes next. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray that someone will find a way to end this, to free Michael from whatever has him, to free me if I'm trapped there too. The cabin knows what happened. The woods remember. Find them, help them, please. The letter was signed James Grafton, in that same shaky hand. We sat in silence after reading it. The conference room felt cold suddenly, despite the heating system running. Dale was watching us, waiting for our reaction. "You think this is real?" Clayton finally said. It wasn't a question. Dale nodded. "I think something happened to my father that night. Something James Grafton couldn't explain rationally, so he never tried, he just ran from it. But now he's dead, and based on what you've told me, based on what you found at that cabin, I think maybe he didn't escape after all." "The coffee cups," I said slowly, thinking out loud. "2 cups waiting for someone. Grafton's ashes were delivered to me 2 months ago," Dale said. "I was supposed to scatter them at the cabin. That was his final wish. But I couldn't do it. I drove out here once, got as far as the trailhead, and turned around. I could feel it. Something wrong about that place. Something that didn't want me there." "Have you been going to the cabin?" Clayton asked. "Making fires? Leaving the cups?" Dale shook his head emphatically. "No, God no, I haven't been anywhere near it. I'm too afraid." "Then who?" I asked. Nobody had an answer for that. We sat there in that conference room, the letter lying on the table between us, all of us trying to make sense of something that seemed to defy sense. Finally, Dale spoke again. "I think they're still there. My father and James Grafton. I think they're trapped somehow, and they're trying to tell us something, trying to show us something." "The notes," Clayton said. "Look for what we found. They want us to find something." "But what?" I asked. "We've searched that cabin top to bottom. There's nothing there." "Maybe not in the cabin," Dale said quietly. "Maybe it's something outside, in the woods, wherever my father's trail ends. The clearing, the oak tree, the place where the footprints always stopped." "We need to go back," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming at me not to. "We need to search that clearing properly, dig if we have to, find out what's there." Clayton and Dale both nodded, and I could see the same fear and determination in their faces that I felt. We didn't understand what was happening, but we knew it wouldn't stop until we found whatever we were meant to find. We started planning the expedition for the next day, none of us realizing just how much darker this was about to get. We assembled a team for the expedition. Me, Clayton, Dale, and 2 other rangers named Marcus Rivera and Jenny Kim, who'd volunteered when they heard about the investigation. Sarah Kowalski wanted to come too, but someone needed to stay at the station to coordinate. So she reluctantly agreed to be our base contact. We started early, before dawn, wanting to reach the cabin and the clearing with plenty of daylight to work with. Dale brought James Grafton's ashes with him, still in their container. He felt, and we agreed, that if we were going to do this, we should honor Grafton's final wish. Maybe that would help somehow. Maybe it would give whatever was happening at that cabin some kind of closure. The hike-in was tense. Nobody talked much. Dale had never been this deep into the backcountry before, and I could see the strain on his face as we got closer to the cabin. He was afraid, and I didn't blame him. I was afraid too. When the cabin came into view, it looked the same as always. Sagging roof, weathered walls, that sense of wrongness that seemed to hang over it like a fog. But there was no smoke this time, no light in the windows. It looked abandoned, truly abandoned, for the first time since this whole thing started. We approached, cautiously anyway, but when we opened the door, the interior confirmed what I'd suspected. The fire was cold, long dead. The coffee cups were gone. Someone had taken them, or they'd never been there at all. The table was empty. The room felt hollow and sad, like something had left and wasn't coming back. The photographs were still in the box behind the fireplace. We'd left them there thinking they belonged to the cabin in some way. Dale looked through them slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he held pictures of his father as a young man, smiling and alive. "He looks happy here," Dale said quietly. He loved these woods, loved coming out here with James. It's not fair that this place became his grave. We gave Dale a moment alone in the cabin while the rest of us headed to the clearing behind it. The trail was still there, faint but visible, leading in that single straight line through the trees. We followed it carefully, Marcus and Jenny marking the path with flagging tape so we wouldn't lose it. The clearing looked different in daylight. It was larger than I remembered, maybe 40 feet across, ringed by oak trees. The ground was relatively flat, covered in dead leaves and the first green shoots of spring grass. The big oak tree, where the trail ended, stood in the eastern section, its trunk massive and gnarled with age. "Spread out," I instructed. "Look for anything unusual. Disturbed earth, markings, anything that might indicate something's buried here." We spent an hour combing through every inch of that clearing. Marcus found what looked like old campfire rings, long abandoned. Jenny found some rusted cans and bottles, probably left by hunters decades ago. But there was nothing that seemed connected to what we were looking for. Then Dale arrived, carrying the container of ashes, and something changed. It's hard to describe exactly what happened. The temperature didn't drop, the sun didn't go behind clouds, but the clearing felt different suddenly. Heavier, like the air itself had become thicker, harder to breathe. And in the silence of the forest I could hear something, a sound like wind, except there was no wind. Like breathing, except there was no one breathing that heavily. "You feel that?" Clayton asked quietly, and I could see everyone else nodding. We all felt it. Dale stood in the center of the clearing, holding his father's best friend's ashes, and looked around slowly. "He's here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My dad. He's here." I wanted to tell him that wasn't possible, that his father had died 50 years ago, that what he was feeling was just emotion and grief and the power of suggestion. But I couldn't, because I felt it too. Something was here, something watching, waiting. "Where do we look?" Jenny asked, her voice tight with nerves. "Where do we dig?" Dale closed his eyes for a moment, standing very still. Then he walked toward the large oak tree, the one where the footprint trail always ended. He stopped maybe 5 feet from its base and pointed at the ground. "Here," he said with certainty. "It's here." We didn't question him. Marcus and Clayton had brought shovels, and they started digging while Jenny and I kept watch, scanning the forest for what, I didn't know. But everything felt wrong now, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. They'd been digging for maybe 20 minutes, down about 2 feet, when Clayton's shovel hit something that wasn't earth or rock. He stopped, looked at Marcus, and they both started digging more carefully, using their hands to clear away the soil. It was fabric, old, rotted, barely holding together, but definitely fabric. Clothing. And underneath the clothing, wrapped in what had once been a tarp or canvas, was bone. Dale made a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a gasp, and sank to his knees beside the hole. "It's him," he whispered. "It's my father." We'd found Michael Torrance. After 50 years, he was finally found. Not lost in the woods, not wandered away, buried, hidden, right here in this clearing where his trail of footprints had always ended. "James Grafton did this," Clayton said quietly. "He killed his friend and buried him here." But Dale was shaking his head. No, James wouldn't have. He couldn't have." I knelt beside Dale, my mind racing. Something wasn't right. If Grafton had killed Torrance and buried him, why tell that story about something taking his friend? Why write that letter describing something inexplicable? Why not just stick to the story of a hunting accident, unless the truth was more complicated than simple murder? "Look at the bones," Jenny said, pointing. She'd been taking photographs for evidence, and now she was examining the remains more closely. The positioning. He's not lying down like you'd bury someone. He's standing, or at least he was standing when he was buried. She was right. The bones, what was left of them, were in a vertical position. Michael Torrance hadn't been laid to rest. He'd been buried standing up, facing east toward the rising sun. And around his feet, wrapped in more rotted fabric, were stones. Dozens of them, arranged in a circle. "A cairn," Marcus said. "Someone marked this grave, but not on top, underneath." The cairn we'd found at the end of the trail. The stones stacked up, they'd been marking what was below, showing us where to dig. "Who did this?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I knew the answer. Who buried him standing up? Who marked the grave? Dale reached out with a trembling hand and touched the edge of the excavation. "James," he said softly. "James did this. But not to hide what he'd done, to honor what happened, to mark where Michael fell." He looked up at us, tears streaming down his face. "Don't you see? James didn't kill him. Something else did. Something in these woods. And James buried him standing because that's how he died. Standing, walking, unable to stop. And then James spent the rest of his life running from it, terrified it would happen to him too." The breathing sound in the clearing grew louder. That sense of presence became overwhelming. And I realized Dale was right. We'd been thinking about this all wrong. This wasn't a murder mystery. This was something else entirely. "We need to call this in," Clayton said, reaching for his radio. But before he could key the mic, something happened that made us all freeze. Footsteps. Clear as day. The sound of boots walking on dead leaves, coming from the forest, getting closer. We all turned towards the sound, and I put my hand on my service weapon. The footsteps were slow, steady, deliberate, and they were coming from the direction of the cabin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice not as steady as I wanted it to be. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that heavy, watchful silence. Then I saw him. A figure between the trees, maybe 30 yards away, dark clothing. Something wrong about the way he stood. Too still, too rigid. And though I couldn't see his face clearly in the shadows, I could see his eyes. Empty, just like Grafton's letter had described. "Michael," Dale whispered. "Dad?" The figure took a step forward, then another. That same methodical pace, not threatening exactly, but inexorable, like nothing could stop him from walking. And behind him, I could see another figure, this one wearing more modern clothing, also walking with that same terrible rhythm. Two of them, walking toward us through the forest. "We need to leave," Marcus said, his voice high with panic. "Right now. We need to leave right now." But Dale was standing up, still holding that container of ashes, taking a step toward the approaching figures. "Dad?" he called again. "Is that you?" "Dale, don't," I warned, but he wasn't listening. He walked forward, past the excavation where his father's bones were buried, toward the two figures. And they stopped. Both of them stopped walking and stood there maybe 20 feet away, just watching. "I brought him back," Dale said, his voice breaking. "James, I brought James back like he asked. You don't have to wait anymore." The figures didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there with those empty eyes, watching. Dale opened the container and began walking toward them, scattering ashes as he went. "You can both rest now," he said. "Please, you can both rest." And then something shifted. The feeling in the clearing changed. That heavy presence lifted slightly, and the figures, they flickered. Just for a second, like a film projector skipping, they flickered and changed. For just a moment, I could see them clearly. Two men in their 30s, dressed in hunting clothes, smiling at each other. Friends, brothers in all but blood. And then they were gone. Not walking away, not fading, just gone, like they'd never been there at all. The silence that followed was different. Lighter. The forest came back to life gradually, first one bird, then another. Then the sound of wind in the leaves and insects buzzing. The clearing felt normal again. Just a patch of forest, nothing more. Dale stood where the figures had been, the empty container still in his hands, crying openly now. Clayton moved to his side, put a hand on his shoulder. The rest of us just stood there, trying to process what we'd seen, what had just happened. We buried Michael Torrance's bones properly that day. Brought in the county coroner, filed all the reports, did everything by the book. His remains were eventually given to Dale, who had them cremated and scattered in that clearing, next to where we'd scattered James Grafton's ashes. The official report stated that we'd found the remains of a missing person from 1973, buried in an unmarked grave. There was no evidence of foul play. The bones showed no signs of violence. The death was ruled as undetermined, possibly due to exposure or accident. The cabin was finally torn down 2 months later. The Park Service decided it was a safety hazard and brought in a crew to demolish it. I watched them work, and when they pulled up the floor, they found one more thing. Carved into the dirt underneath the floorboards, barely visible, were words. "They walk who cannot rest. They wait who cannot leave the woods. Remember the woods keep." The crew foreman asked me what it meant. I told him I didn't know. It was easier than trying to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. It's been 3 years since all of that happened. I'm still a ranger in the Ozarks, though I transferred to a different district. Clayton retired, moved to be closer to his daughter in Missouri. Dale Torrance sends me a Christmas card every year, thanking me for helping him find his father. He says the nightmares have stopped, that his father can rest now. I still patrol forests and mountains. I still love this job, love these woods. But I'm more careful now about the places I go, the trails I follow. Because I learned something during those weeks at the Grafton cabin. The woods do remember. And some debts, some promises, some bonds between people are so strong that not even death can break them. Michael Torrance and James Grafton made a promise to each other, that they'd wait, that they'd have one last hunt together. And even after death, even after 50 years, they kept that promise. Michael walked, unable to rest. James ran, unable to escape. Until finally, someone brought them both home. I don't tell people this story. Most wouldn't believe it anyway. They'd say I was tired, that we all saw what we wanted to see, that grief and suggestion created something that wasn't there. Maybe they're right. Maybe we imagined those figures in the clearing, imagined that sense of presence and wrongness. But I don't think so. I was there. I felt it. I saw it. And I know what I know. If you're ever hiking in the Ozarks, especially in the backcountry where the old cabins and forgotten trails are, pay attention to what you feel. If a place feels wrong, if it feels heavy or watching or waiting, don't ignore that instinct. Turn around, leave, because some places hold on to things. Grief, guilt, promises, death. And sometimes those things don't let go easily. And if you ever find an abandoned cabin with smoke coming from the chimney, with warm coffee cups sitting on the table, with evidence that someone was just there but nowhere for them to have gone, don't go inside. Don't investigate. Don't try to solve the mystery. Just leave. Walk away. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some doors are better left closed. I learned that lesson at the Grafton cabin. I hope you never have to learn it at all. But if you do, if you find yourself in a place where the dead still walk, where promises outlive the people who made them, where the woods remember what we'd rather forget, just remember this. 2 went into the woods. Only 1 came back. But which one? The one who left, or the one who stayed? The one who lived, or the one who kept living? The cabin knew. The woods remember. And now you do too. Time is supposed to be constant. It moves forward, 1 second after another, never stopping, never skipping. That's what we're taught, what we believe. But I learned differently on a cold morning in March 2022, on a trail in the Ozarks where time itself seemed to break. My name is Evan McBride, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years. I've seen strange things in that time. Unexplained disappearances, bizarre animal behavior, places where compasses spin uselessly. But nothing prepared me for what happened when we went looking for Marcus Holloway, a trail runner who vanished on the Limestone Loop. The call came in at 7:30 on a Saturday morning. A woman named Jennifer Holloway reported that her husband hadn't come home from his morning run. He'd left at 5:45, planning to do the Limestone Loop, an 8-mile trail that winds through some of the densest forest in our district. He should have been back by 7:15 at the latest. When he wasn't home by 7:30, Jennifer started calling. By 7:45, she was at the ranger station filing a missing person report. My partner, Reese Talbot, and I were assigned to the search. Reese had been a ranger for 15 years, longer than I'd been doing this job, and she'd led dozens of search and rescue operations. If anyone could find Marcus Holloway, it was her. We met Jennifer at the trailhead where Marcus had started his run. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in running gear herself and barely holding it together. Her hands shook as she showed us photos of her husband on her phone. A fit man in his late 30s with dark hair and a runner's lean build. "He knows this trail," Jennifer said, her voice tight. "He runs it 3 times a week. He has his phone with him, always. But when I call, it goes straight to voicemail." "Did he say anything unusual before he left?" Reese asked gently. "Was he worried about anything, feeling sick, anything like that?" Jennifer shook her head. "No, nothing. He was normal, happy, even. He just hit a personal record on his 5-mile time last week and was feeling good about his training." I made notes while Reese asked more questions. Marcus was an experienced runner in excellent physical condition, familiar with the trail. He'd been running alone, which wasn't unusual for him. He carried a hydration pack, his phone, and nothing else. No medical conditions, no medications, no history of confusion or disorientation. On paper, this should have been straightforward. An experienced runner on a familiar trail in good weather. But something about Jennifer's fear was contagious. The way she kept glancing at the trailhead, like she expected her husband to come running out any second but somehow knew he wouldn't. "We'll find him," Reese assured her, though I noticed she didn't say we'll find him safe. After 15 years, Reese knew better than to make promises she might not be able to keep. We left Jennifer with another ranger who'd arrived to coordinate communication, and Reese and I started up the limestone loop. The morning was cold and damp, the kind of weather that makes the Ozarks feel primordial. Fog clung to the hollows, and the trees were bare except for the evergreens. Everything was gray and brown and silent. The trail was well maintained, a mix of packed dirt and limestone outcroppings that gave it its name. We moved quickly but carefully, scanning both sides of the path for any sign of Marcus. A dropped water bottle, a piece of torn clothing, anything that might tell us he'd passed this way. We'd been hiking for about 40 minutes when Reese stopped suddenly. She was staring at the trail ahead, her hand raised to halt me. "Look at this," she said quietly. I moved up beside her and saw what had caught her attention. In a patch of soft dirt on the trail, maybe 10 feet ahead of us, was a footprint. A running shoe print, clear and distinct. It was pointing forward, in the direction Marcus would have been running. But that wasn't what made Reese stop. What made her stop was that the footprint was incomplete. It started normally, the heel impression, the middle of the foot. But at the front, where the toe should have pushed off, it just ended. Not gradually, like the runner had lifted their foot. It ended abruptly, as if the foot had been there 1 second and gone the next. Like someone had been running and then suddenly wasn't touching the ground anymore. I knelt down to examine it more closely. The print was fresh, probably from this morning. The depth and spacing suggested someone running at a good pace, and the pattern matched the photo Jennifer had shown us of Marcus's running shoes. "Could he have jumped?" I suggested, "leaped over something?" Reese was already scanning ahead, looking for where he might have landed, but there was nothing. The trail continued normally, with no disturbed earth, no other footprints, no sign that anyone had landed after a jump. "He'd have to have jumped at least 15 feet to clear all this undisturbed ground," Reese said. "And there's no reason to jump. The trail is clear." I pulled out my camera and photographed the print from multiple angles. Something about it made my skin crawl. It was such a normal print, just a runner's footprint in soft dirt, but the way it ended, that sharp termination where there should have been a toe off, felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. "Let's keep going," Reese said, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Maybe he twisted an ankle, went off trail to rest." We continued forward, moving even more slowly now, examining every inch of ground. About 50 yards past the incomplete footprint, we found something else. A small piece of torn fabric, blue synthetic material, caught on a branch about 5 feet off the ground. The same shade of blue as the running shirt Marcus had been wearing in Jennifer's photos. Reese carefully removed it and bagged it as evidence. "He came through here," she said. "But how did this get up here? You don't brush against branches at head height when you're running on a clear trail." Unless you weren't on the ground, I thought, but didn't say. We kept searching, spreading out to check both sides of the trail. The forest here was thick, oak and hickory trees with an understory of mountain laurel and brambles. Visibility was maybe 20 feet before the vegetation got too dense. I called out Marcus's name every few minutes, my voice sounding flat and dead in the damp air. Nothing. No response, no sounds of movement, nothing. Then Reese called me over. She was standing about 30 feet off the trail, holding her GPS unit, staring at the screen with a frown. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. She'd been recording our path, standard procedure for search and rescue. The GPS track showed our route from the trailhead, a continuous line marking where we'd walked, but there was something wrong with it. At a point that corresponded to where we'd found the incomplete footprint, the track line just stopped. For maybe 100 feet there was no track at all. Then it picked up again, right where we were standing now. "Equipment malfunction?" I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Reese shook her head. "GPS satellites don't just stop working for 100 feet and then start again. If it was interference or a dead zone, we'd see scattered points or an error message. This is like we just weren't anywhere for that 100 feet. Like we didn't exist for those 30 seconds or so." I pulled out my own GPS unit and checked the track. Same thing. A gap in the data right where the footprint had been. "That's not possible," I said. "I know," Reese replied. "But look at it. It's right there." We stood there for a moment, both of us staring at our GPS screens, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Then I remembered my watch. It was a good one, a tactical watch that logged time, tracked my movements, kept accurate time from satellite signals. I pulled up the log and felt my stomach drop. According to my watch, it was 8:53 a.m., but according to the last time check I'd done, back at the trailhead just before we'd started hiking, it had been 8:32. We'd been hiking for 45 minutes, which should have made it 9:17. My watch had gone backward. Somehow, I'd lost 24 minutes, or gained them back, or something. "Reese," I said slowly, "check your watch." She did. Her face went pale. "I'm missing time," she said quietly. 20 minutes. How's that possible? We stood there in the forest, surrounded by trees and fog and silence, with gaps in our GPS tracks and missing minutes from our watches, and no logical explanation for any of it. And somewhere out here, Marcus Holloway was missing too. "We need to report this," Reese said, reaching for her radio. But when she keyed the mic, all we got was static. She tried different channels, tried adjusting the frequency. Nothing but white noise, like the radio wasn't picking up any signal at all. "Dead zone," I suggested, though I knew this trail well enough to know there shouldn't be any dead zones. We were in the Ozarks, not the Rockies. The terrain wasn't that extreme. Reese tried her cell phone. No signal. I tried mine. Same thing. "Okay," Reese said, her voice carefully controlled. "We're going to proceed with the search, but we're going to be very careful. We stay together. We don't split up. We mark our path clearly, and at the first sign of anything else unusual, we turn back and get help. Agreed?" I nodded, though part of me wanted to turn back right then. But Marcus Holloway was out here somewhere, and we were his best chance of getting found. We continued deeper into the forest, moving off the main trail now, following what we thought might be Marcus's path based on the torn fabric and the direction the incomplete footprint had been pointing. The terrain got rougher. More rocks, steeper slopes, thicker vegetation. This wasn't an area where trail runners typically went. It was too hard to navigate, too easy to get turned around. About 20 minutes later, or what felt like 20 minutes, though I'd stopped trusting my perception of time, we found something that made us both stop cold. There was a clearing ahead, maybe 40 feet across, where the trees thinned out and the ground was mostly exposed rock and moss. And in the center of that clearing was a circle of stones. Not a natural formation. These were clearly placed by human hands, arranged in a perfect circle about 10 feet in diameter. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what was in the center of the circle. Marcus Holloway's hydration pack, sitting upright in the exact middle of the stone circle like it had been carefully placed there. His phone was next to it, screen cracked but still on. And arranged around them in smaller circles were his shoe, his running watch, his ID card from his work lanyard. All his personal items, laid out in concentric circles, like some kind of offering or display, but no sign of Marcus himself. Reese and I approached slowly, both of us scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. This felt like a trap, or a scene, or something staged. But for what purpose? Who would do this? "Don't touch anything yet," Reese said. "Let me photograph everything first." While she documented the scene, I walked the perimeter of the clearing, looking for any sign of how Marcus, or whoever had arranged his things, had gotten here. I found tracks, but they were confusing. Multiple sets of footprints, all the same size and pattern, Marcus's shoes. But they seemed to come from different directions, converge on the circle, and then nothing. No tracks leading away. It was like Marcus had been here multiple times, approaching from different angles but had never left. "Evan," Reese called out. "Look at his phone." I walked back to where she was crouched near the items. The phone screen was cracked but still displaying. Reese had been careful not to touch it, but the screen was visible enough to read. It was open to a voice memo app. The most recent recording was from this morning, time-stamped at 6:14 a.m. Reese used her own phone to photograph the screen, then carefully picked up Marcus's phone with a gloved hand and pressed play on the recording. Static filled the air for a few seconds. Then Marcus's voice, breathing hard like he'd been running. "I don't know what's happening. I was running the loop, making good time, felt great. Then I got to the mile 4 marker and everything just... I can't explain it. It's like the trail folded. Like I took a step and ended up somewhere else. The trees look wrong. The light is wrong. I'm trying to backtrack, but I keep ending up in the same clearing. I've been here 3 times now. 3 times. I'm not running in circles. I'm being very careful to mark my path, but I keep ending up back here." A pause, heavy breathing. Then Marcus's voice again, lower and more frightened. "There's something wrong with my watch. It keeps jumping. I've been out here for 15 minutes according to my phone, but my watch says I've been running for 2 hours. That doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. I'm going to try one more time to find the main trail. If anyone finds this, I started at the Limestone Loop trailhead at 5:45 a.m. Tell Jennifer I love her." The recording ended. Reese and I looked at each other. The timestamp on the recording was 6:14. According to Jennifer, Marcus had left at 5:45, which meant he'd been out here for only 29 minutes when he made that recording. But he'd said his watch showed 2 hours. And he'd said he'd been to this clearing 3 times already. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Now. This is beyond a normal search and rescue." Reese nodded. But before we could move, something happened that made us both freeze. The clearing changed. I don't have a better way to describe it. Nothing dramatic, no flash of light or sound of thunder, but 1 second we were standing at the edge of a clearing in daylight. Gray, overcast daylight, but daylight nonetheless, and the next second the light was different. Dimmer, but not darker. Like we were seeing through a filter, or like the air itself had become thicker. And the silence. The forest had been quiet before, but now it was silent in a way that felt oppressive, unnatural. No wind, no insects, no distant bird calls, just absolute, crushing silence. "Reese," I whispered. "Do you see this?" "Yeah," she breathed. "I see it." We stood there, not moving, trying to process what was happening. The clearing looked the same, but everything felt wrong. The temperature had dropped. I could see my breath now, though it had been above freezing seconds ago. The moss on the rocks looked different, darker, like it had aged years in an instant. And then I saw movement at the far edge of the clearing, a figure walking toward us. My first thought was that it was Marcus, and relief flooded through me. But as the figure got closer, I realized it wasn't moving right. The walk was too stiff, too mechanical, and there was something wrong with the proportions, like the limbs were slightly too long. "That's not human," Reese whispered, and her hand moved to her service weapon. The figure stopped at the edge of the stone circle, maybe 30 feet from us. It was wearing running clothes, the same blue shirt and black shorts Marcus had been wearing in the photos. But the face was wrong. Not deformed or monstrous, just wrong. Like someone had tried to copy Marcus Holloway's face from a photograph but had gotten the details slightly off. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was at the wrong angle. The skin tone wasn't quite right. He looked at us. Or at least the face pointed in our direction. I couldn't tell if there was any intelligence behind those wrong-looking eyes. Then it spoke, and the voice was Marcus's voice, but flat, emotionless. "I keep ending up back here, 3 times, 4 times, how many times?" "Marcus," Reese called out, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. "Marcus Holloway." The figure tilted its head at an angle no human neck should bend. "Time is wrong here. The trail folds. I keep walking, but I arrive before I leave. I am here. I was here. I will be here." I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get away from this clearing and this thing that looked like Marcus but wasn't Marcus. But Reese was still trying to communicate with it, still trying to make sense of this impossible situation. "Where is Marcus Holloway?" she demanded. "What happened to him?" The figure looked down at the items arranged in the center of the stone circle. He left himself behind, piece by piece. Every time he returned to the circle, he left something, until there was nothing left to leave. Then it looked back at us with those wrong eyes. "You're leaving pieces too. You just don't know it yet." And then it was gone. Not walking away, not fading, just gone, like a light switching off. The clearing changed again, snapping back to normal daylight and normal temperature. The oppressive silence lifted, and I could hear wind in the trees again, a bird calling somewhere in the distance. Reese and I stood there, both of us breathing hard, staring at the spot where the figure had been. "What the hell was that?" I managed to say. "I don't know," Reese said, and her voice was shaking. "But we need to leave, right now." We grabbed Marcus's phone and hydration pack, leaving the other items where they were, unable to bring ourselves to touch them, and started back the way we'd come, or at least the way we thought we'd come. But the forest looked different now. The trees were in the wrong places. The trail we'd marked with flagging tape was gone. We walked for what felt like hours, but my watch said only 10 minutes had passed, Then it said 15 minutes. Then it said 8 minutes. The numbers kept jumping, forward and backward, making it impossible to know how long we'd been walking. "We're lost," Reese said finally. "We're in the same situation Marcus was in." I checked my GPS. The screen showed our location, but the coordinates kept changing even though we were standing still. 1 second we were at one set of coordinates, the next second we were half a mile away, then back to where we'd started. "We need to pick a direction and stick with it," I said, "no matter what we see or what our instruments tell us." Reese nodded. We chose to head downhill, figuring that would eventually lead us to water, which would lead us out of the forest. We marked our path carefully, breaking branches, piling rocks, anything to help us know if we were walking in circles. But we kept ending up back at the clearing with the stone circle. 3 times, 4 times, just like Marcus had said. Each time we approached from a different direction, but we always ended up in the same place. On the 5th return to the clearing, something was different. There were new items in the circle. A ranger patch, the kind we wore on our uniforms. A radio, a GPS unit that looked exactly like the one Reese was carrying. "Check your gear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Reese looked down at her belt. Her radio was missing. So was her GPS unit. But they'd been there 30 seconds ago. I would have sworn they'd been there. "This is how he disappeared," Reese whispered. "Piece by piece. The place is taking pieces of us." I checked my own gear. My watch was gone. The knife I kept clipped to my belt was gone. Items I knew I'd had minutes ago were just missing, like they'd never been there. "We run," I said. "We don't stop, we don't look back, we run until we're out of here." And we did. We ran through that forest like our lives depended on it, because they probably did. We ignored the trails, ignored the clearings, ignored the impossible things we saw from the corners of our eyes. We just ran. I don't know how long we ran. My watch was gone, and time felt fluid and wrong. But eventually, finally, we burst out of the tree line and onto a paved road. A road I recognized. County Route 7, about 2 miles from the park entrance. We stood there on the shoulder, gasping for breath, checking ourselves over. We were intact. Everything important was still with us. But we'd lost items. My watch, Reese's radio and GPS, other small things. They were just gone, left behind in that forest that folded time and space and took pieces of people who wandered too deep. A car stopped, the driver asking if we needed help. Reese managed to tell him we were park rangers who'd gotten turned around on a search and rescue. He drove us back to the station. When we got there, Jennifer Holloway was still waiting. But the superintendent told us something that made my blood run cold. We'd been gone for 12 hours. We'd entered the trail at 8:30 in the morning. It was now 8:45 at night. But according to our perception, we'd only been out there for maybe 3 hours. 9 hours missing, just gone, like the gap in our GPS tracks, like the missing minutes on our watches. Time had done something impossible to us the same way it had done something impossible to Marcus Holloway. They organized a massive search party the next day. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, search dogs, helicopters. They found the stone circle. They found Marcus's items. They even found the incomplete footprint and the torn fabric. But they never found Marcus Holloway. He was declared dead after the standard waiting period, his death attributed to misadventure in the wilderness. The official report said he'd likely fallen, hit his head, and wandered in confusion until he succumbed to exposure. The report said nothing about the missing time, the impossible GPS tracks, the thing that looked like Marcus but wasn't. Those details stayed in Reese's and my unofficial reports, filed away in a drawer somewhere, marked as unreliable due to environmental stress and possible exposure. I took a week off after that search. Reese took 2. When we came back, neither of us wanted to talk about what had happened, but we couldn't ignore it either. It sat between us like a weight, this shared experience that nobody else believed, that we couldn't explain even to ourselves. 3 weeks after Marcus disappeared, I was doing paperwork in my office when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd gotten in the habit of screening calls since the search, since reporters and curiosity seekers had started calling, asking about the mysterious disappearance on the Limestone Loop. But something made me pick up. Evan McBride? The voice was female, older, careful. Speaking, who's this? My name is Dr. Sarah Brennan. I'm a geologist with the USGS. I heard about the Marcus Holloway case from a friend in the Park Service, and I think you and I should talk. I leaned back in my chair. I've said everything I'm going to say about that case, Dr. Brennan. There's nothing else to add. I'm not interested in Marcus Holloway, she said. I'm interested in the Limestone Loop Trail, specifically in the section where you and Ranger Talbot experienced temporal anomalies. The word temporal made me sit up straighter. How do you know about that? Because it's happened before, De Brennan said, and I can help you understand why. We met at a coffee shop in town the next day. Dr. Brennan was in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She brought a laptop and a folder full of papers, spreading them across the table between us. The Ozarks are old, she began. Geologically speaking, they're some of the oldest exposed rock in North America. Precambrian stone, over 1 billion years old. And there's something unusual about certain formations in this area. Have you heard of magnetite deposits? I shook my head. Magnetite is a naturally magnetic mineral. It's found all over the world, but there are unusually high concentrations in parts of the Ozarks. These deposits can affect compasses, GPS systems, even electronic devices. She pulled out a geological survey map marked with highlighted areas. The Limestone Loop Trail runs directly over one of the largest magnetite deposits in Arkansas. You think that's what caused our GPS to malfunction? I asked. GPS, yes, but not just GPS. She pulled out another paper, this one covered in equations and diagrams I didn't understand. Strong magnetic fields can affect how we perceive time. There's been research suggesting that magnetic fields interfere with the way our brains process temporal information. Under the right conditions, in the right location, people can experience time dilation, where seconds feel like minutes, or minutes feel like seconds. I thought about my watch going backward, about the gaps in our GPS tracks, about Marcus saying his watch showed 2 hours when only 29 minutes had passed. So you're saying Marcus got disoriented because of magnetic fields? I asked. That he got lost because his brain couldn't process time correctly? I'm saying it's one possibility, Dr. Brennan said carefully. But there's something else, something I can't explain as easily. She pulled out another map, older and hand-drawn. I've been researching disappearances in the Ozarks for 20 years. There's a pattern. People vanish in certain spots, always the same general areas, and those areas always correspond to high magnetite deposits. She pointed to locations on her map, dozens of them, marked with red X's. These are all documented disappearances going back to 1920. Hikers, hunters, children, experienced outdoorsmen, all vanished without a trace in or near areas with strong magnetic anomalies. How many? I asked quietly. 73 that I've been able to document, she said. Probably more that weren't recorded or that were attributed to other causes. 73 people. 73 Marcus Holloways walking into the forest and never coming out, leaving pieces of themselves behind until there was nothing left. Why? I asked. Why does it happen? Dr. Brennan closed her laptop and looked at me directly. I don't know. The scientific explanation would be that the magnetic fields disorient people. They get lost, they panic, they make poor decisions. But I've been to some of these sites. I've felt what you felt, and I don't think it's just magnetism. Then what is it? She was quiet for a long moment. There are places in the world where the rules don't quite work right, where physics gets strange. Quantum mechanics suggests that time isn't as fixed as we think it is, that there might be fluctuations, anomalies. What if certain geological formations, under certain conditions, create spots where time becomes unstable, where past and future overlap, where someone can take a step forward and end up somewhere, or somewhen else? It sounded crazy, but it wasn't any crazier than what I'd experienced, than GPS tracks with gaps in them, or watches that ran backward, or seeing something that looked like Marcus, but wasn't Marcus. Can it be fixed? I asked. Can we do something to prevent it? Dr. Brennan shook her head. You can't fix geology. Those rocks have been there for 1 billion years. They'll be there for another 1 billion. All you can do is recognize the danger and warn people away. After my meeting with Dr. Brennan, I went to the superintendent and requested that the limestone loop be closed permanently. I gave him everything Dr. Brennan had given me: the geological surveys, the documentation of disappearances, the scientific explanations for the anomalies. He listened. He looked at the evidence. And then he said no. We can't close a trail because of some geologist's theories about magnetic fields, he said. Marcus Holloway's disappearance was a tragedy, but it was an isolated incident. There's no evidence of ongoing danger. What about the temporal anomalies? I pressed. What about the missing time, the GPS malfunctions, equipment failure? He said dismissively. Stress-related perceptual errors. There's no scientific proof that anything supernatural or extraordinary happened on that trail. I left his office furious, but I understood his position. The Park Service couldn't close trails based on unexplainable phenomena. They needed concrete evidence of danger, falling rocks, dangerous wildlife, something measurable and documentable. So Reese and I did the only thing we could do. We put up warning signs at the trailhead. Not official Park Service signs. Those would have been taken down. But handmade signs, laminated and posted on trees just outside the official boundary. Caution: strong magnetic fields may affect GPS and electronics. Warning: multiple disappearances reported in this area. Hike at your own risk. The Park Service took them down within a week. We put up new ones. They took those down too. It became a quiet war of attrition, us trying to warn people, the bureaucracy trying to pretend there was nothing wrong. But the trail got a reputation. Word spread online. The limestone loop where people disappeared, where time went wrong, where hikers reported feeling watched and disoriented. Most people avoided it. The few who didn't were usually curiosity seekers who left after experiencing something that spooked them. No one else has disappeared there. At least, not that I know of. But I still lie awake sometimes, thinking about Marcus Holloway and those 73 other people Dr. Brennan documented. Wondering if they're still out there, walking in circles through some pocket of wrong time, leaving pieces of themselves behind with each pass through that clearing. Wondering if part of Reese and me is still out there too. We lost time, 9 hours that neither of us can account for. We lost items, my watch, her GPS, other small things. What else did we lose that we haven't noticed yet? What pieces of ourselves did we leave behind in that folded place where the trail doesn't make sense? 6 months after Marcus disappeared, Jennifer Holloway sent me a letter. She'd moved away from Arkansas, gone to stay with family in Oregon, trying to start over. But she wanted to tell me something. A few weeks after we'd called off the active search, she'd gotten a phone call. 3 a.m., her cell phone ringing. She'd answered it half asleep and she'd heard Marcus's voice just for a second. He'd said, "I keep ending up back here," and then the line had gone dead. She'd told herself it was a dream, stress and grief creating an auditory hallucination. But then it happened again 2 weeks later. Same time, same voice, same message. "I keep ending up back here." "It's happened 4 times now," she wrote. Always at 3 a.m., always the same words. "I had the number traced, but it comes back as unavailable, no location data. I'm not crazy. I know what I heard. I think he's trying to tell me something. I think he's stuck somewhere, trying to find his way back, and he keeps ending up in the same place. Is that possible? Can someone be lost in time like that?" I didn't know how to answer her letter. What could I say? That yes, I think her husband is trapped in some loop of wrong time, walking the same path over and over, leaving pieces of himself behind each time. That I saw something that looked like him, but wasn't quite right. That I heard him say those exact words. In the end, I didn't answer at all. Some truths are too terrible to share. I'm still a ranger in the Ozarks. I still walk these trails, though I avoid the limestone loop now. Reese transferred to a different district last year. Too many memories, she said. Too many questions she couldn't answer. But sometimes when I'm out on patrol in the early morning, when the fog is thick and the forest is silent, I think about time, about how we assume it's constant, reliable, measurable, about how we trust our watches and our phones and our GPS units to tell us where and when we are. And I wonder if that trust is misplaced. If there are places in the world, maybe more places than we know, where time doesn't work right, where you can take a step forward and end up somewhere else, somewhen else, where you can walk the same path 3 times, 4 times, 100 times, and never find your way home. Marcus Holloway went for a run on a Saturday morning. 8 miles, familiar trail, perfect weather. He should have been home by 7:15. Instead, he walked into a place where the trail folded and time broke and the rules stopped making sense. And he never walked out. I hope Dr. Brennan is right. I hope it's just magnetism and geology and quantum fluctuations that we don't understand yet, but someday will. I hope there's a scientific explanation that will make sense of it all. But I don't think there is. I think there are places in these old mountains where something went wrong a long time ago, where the fabric of reality got thin or torn or twisted, where people can slip through the cracks and end up nowhere, trapped in loops of time that spiral inward forever. If you ever hike the Ozarks, pay attention to how you feel. If your GPS starts acting strange, if your watch starts jumping, if time feels wrong, turn around. Leave. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand it. Just get out while you still can. Because some trails don't lead anywhere you want to go. Some paths fold back on themselves, trapping you in circles you can't escape. And some minutes, once lost, can never be found again. Marcus Holloway lost 6 minutes according to his wife's timeline. Then he lost more. Then he lost himself, piece by piece, until nothing was left but a voice on a phone saying, "I keep ending up back here." Reese and I lost 9 hours. We got them back, or at least we got ourselves back, but I don't think we got all of ourselves. There are moments I can't quite remember from that day. Gaps in my memory that feel like the gaps in our GPS tracks. Missing pieces. Time is supposed to be constant. It's supposed to move forward, 1 second after another, never stopping, never skipping, never folding back on itself. But I know differently now. I know there are places where time breaks, where minutes disappear, where you can run forward and end up right where you started, over and over, trapped in a loop that has no exit. The limestone loop is still open. People still hike it. Most of them finish without incident, never knowing how close they came to stepping into something impossible. But every now and then, someone doesn't come back. Every now and then we get a call about a missing hiker, and when we search the trail we find incomplete footprints, torn fabric caught on branches, items arranged in circles, gaps in GPS tracks, missing time. And we know it's happened again. The trail has folded. Someone has slipped through. Someone else is walking in circles now, leaving pieces of themselves behind, unable to find the way home. I still don't know how to stop it. I don't know if it can be stopped. All I can do is keep putting up warning signs, keep trying to save people from walking into those folded places where time goes wrong. But sometimes I wonder if anyone can really be saved from something like that. Or if, once you've walked into a place where time breaks, you're already lost, already becoming a ghost, already leaving pieces of yourself behind until there's nothing left but an echo, a voice on the phone at 3 a.m. saying, "I keep ending up back here." I hope Marcus found his way out. I hope he's somewhere beyond that loop, at rest, at peace, but I don't think he is. I think he's still walking, still running that trail over and over, trying to find the way home, trying to understand what happened to the missing minutes that became missing hours, that became a missing life. Time is supposed to be constant, but in the Ozarks, in certain places, at certain times, it's not. And that's the most terrifying thing I've ever learned. Some trails lead nowhere. Some minutes vanish. Some people step off the path and never step back on. And the forest remembers, the rocks remember, the folded places remember. They're still there, waiting. Waiting for the next person to walk into the wrong spot at the wrong time. Waiting to take pieces. Waiting to fold. If you see an incomplete footprint on a trail, turn around. If your watch starts running backward, leave. If time feels wrong, trust that feeling. Because once you step into a folded place, once time breaks around you, there might not be any stepping back out. Marcus Holloway went for a run. He lost 6 minutes. Then he lost everything. Don't let it happen to you.